pull-away instinct explained. You reach out. They take longer to text back. You ask about their day and the answer gets shorter. You suggest plans and suddenly they're busy. It happens so slowly you almost miss it. Or you see it all at once like a door closing. That feeling of someone slipping away is not random noise in a relationship. It's a pattern with roots, and it almost always makes sense to someone, even if it doesn't make sense to you. The pull-away is not an accident or a sign they stopped caring. It's usually a response to overwhelm, to feeling misunderstood, to moving too fast, to needing space to breathe, or sometimes to old wounds that have nothing to do with you at all. Your first job in this conversation is to understand what pulls people away so you stop taking it personally and start seeing what's actually happening underneath. Here's what matters. The pull-away instinct is self-protective, not cruel. When someone feels crowded, their nervous system activates a quiet defense. Distance. When they feel judged, they withdraw. When they sense you need them to be someone they're not, they pull inward. And when past abandonment or rejection lives in their body, even closeness can trigger a retreat. None of that means you did something wrong. It means they are reacting to their own internal weather, their own history, their own capacity in this moment. Understanding this stops the spiral where you chase and they run further, the oldest dance in relationships. In the hours ahead, we're going to walk through exactly why this happens, how to recognize when it's starting, and what actually works when someone you care about begins to disappear. The pull-away is not the end. It's a signal you've been missing. Emotional flooding shutdown. Your partner says something that lands wrong, not mean, just wrong, and suddenly you can feel it. Your chest tightens, your thoughts scatter, your body seems to decide the conversation is over before your mind even catches up. You go quiet, or you leave the room, or you say something you don't mean just to make the feeling stop. What's happening in that moment isn't weakness or avoidance. It's a neurological event called emotional flooding, when your nervous system perceives threat. And yes, relationship conflict absolutely reads as threat to your survival brain. Everything shifts. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that reasons and listens and holds on to why you love this person, goes dark. Your amygdala takes the wheel. You're not being cold or distant on purpose. You're in a state where calm conversation becomes physically impossible. Your body has literally shut down your ability to think straight. It's not a choice, it's a cascade. Here's where the trap deepens. When you shut down, your partner usually panics. They sense rejection and push harder, flooding their own nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. Now you have two people in full crisis mode, unable to access the empathy or curiosity that would actually help. The pull-away starts in that gap between what you want to say and what your body will physically permit. The shift comes when you recognize flooding not as proof you should leave, but as a signal to pause. If your chest tightens or your thoughts fog, that's your moment to name it plainly. I'm flooding right now. I need 15 minutes and I'll come back to this. That sentence, honest and time-bounded, tells your partner you haven't abandoned the conversation. You're protecting your ability to show up for it. Your nervous system has to regulate before real dialogue can happen again. Without that pause, you're both just reacting to the alarm bells going off inside, and nothing gets heard. Attachment system deactivation. You reach out for connection and get nothing back. Not anger, not rejection, just flatness. So you stop reaching, not because you stopped loving them, but because your nervous system learned that asking for closeness costs more than it pays. When turning towards someone repeatedly results in shame, dismissal, or indifference, your attachment system gets the message. This bid for connection will hurt. Shut it down. It is the same neural logic that makes your hand pull away from a hot stove, except instead of a stove, it is another human being. Your body does not distinguish between physical pain and relational pain. Both are threats that need managing. So your system dampens the urge to reach, softens the need to be seen, and gradually rewires your expectations. This is not punishment from yourself. It is protection. What makes deactivation so insidious is that it feels like freedom at first. You become self-reliant, distant, easygoing on the surface. You might even feel relieved. No more vulnerability, no more rejection. But underneath, you are running on a lower setting, like a phone in battery saver mode. Present, but not really open. And if that person suddenly softens and reaches back toward you, something strange happens. It can feel threatening, not comforting. Your system is no longer tuned to recognize safety and closeness. You have trained it to expect pain. The real shift begins when you recognize that deactivation was not weakness or stubbornness. It was your nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do to keep you safe. That clarity matters because it lets you see the pattern without shame. And without shame, you can actually actually start rewiring it, first in small moments, then in relationships that feel different enough to take the risk again. Avoidant deactivating strategies. You're sitting across from someone you care about. They lean in to talk about something tender, how lonely they felt, what they need from you, and something in you shifts. Suddenly, you notice their tone is slightly annoying. Their neediness feels suffocating. The conversation itself seems pointless, or worse, like a trap. You find yourself making a joke, pulling out your phone, or mentally checking out while they're still talking. That sudden flip from warmth to cold distance in seconds, that is a deactivating strategy. It's not a choice you're conscious of making. It's your nervous system hitting the eject button the moment intimacy gets real. What's happening underneath is that closeness triggered an old alarm. Maybe you learned early that needing someone led to disappointment, or that dependence meant losing yourself, or that vulnerability could be weaponized against you. So your brain developed a shortcut. When the other person gets close enough to matter, activate the exit, create distance, find fault, withdraw affection, make yourself unavailable. It works brilliantly in the short term. The discomfort vanishes, the pressure lifts, and you feel in control again. But here is what makes this pattern sticky. The other person experiences it as rejection, so they either pursue harder, which triggers more deactivation, or they give up entirely, and you, alone again, feel briefly relieved, then gradually empty. The trap is that the very strategy meant to protect you from abandonment often becomes what ensures it. The move isn't to white-knuckle through closeness or shame yourself for pulling away. It's to notice the exact moment the alarm fires, the microsecond when the conversation feels like a threat, and pause there long enough to ask, am I reacting to what's actually happening or to what my past taught me to expect? Anxious protest behavior. You send a text. 3 hours pass, no answer. Your chest tightens, so you send another, then another. Maybe you call, maybe you show up, maybe you say something sharp to prove you matter, to prove they should care enough to respond. Because silence, in that moment, feels like abandonment disguised as a text thread. That escalation, that desperate push to get a reaction, any reaction, is protest behavior. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind. When someone you depend on goes unreachable, your nervous system reads threat, your attachment system screams for contact, and because you cannot tolerate the uncertainty, you do something, anything, to force them to engage. The cruel part is this: protest behavior often backfires. The person pulling away feels pressured. You feel rejected. Both of you dig in deeper. What started as a reach for connection becomes proof to them that closeness with you is suffocating. To you, their withdrawal becomes proof they never cared. Neither of you is wrong. You are both trapped in a cycle where your protection strategy is exactly what triggers theirs. The person with anxious attachment does not protest because they are needy or dramatic. They protest because their wiring learned early that love requires pursuit, that you have to earn the other person's attention, that distance equals loss. The body remembers this lesson long after the mind forgets who taught it. So before your next protest, the next text, the next show of anger or hurt, the next demand for reassurance, pause and feel what is actually happening underneath. Are you reaching for them, or are you running from your own fear of being forgotten? Are you trying to reconnect or trying to prove they cannot leave? That distinction, small as it seems, rewires everything. The fearful avoidant push-pull. You meet someone and something in you softens. You text them, you show up, you're all in. Then something shifts. Maybe they take 3 hours to reply. Maybe you catch yourself wanting more than they seem willing to give. And suddenly, you're building walls. You pull back hard, go cold, convince yourself you don't need them anyway. But the moment they back off or seem distant, panic floods in and you're reaching out again. Softer this time, almost apologetic. That oscillation between clinging and fleeing is the fearful, avoidant pattern, and it leaves both partners dizzy because each one feels like they're simply responding to the other's distance, when really, they're both caught in the same loop. What makes this pattern so sticky is that it usually has roots in early attachment. A parent who was inconsistently available, perhaps loving one moment and withdrawn the next. Your nervous system learned that closeness wasn't safe and solitude wasn't either, so it became an expert at swinging between them. You crave intimacy, but don't believe it will last. So you create the very abandonment you fear, pushing to prove they'll leave. They do, or seem to, and you pull them back in out of panic or regret. Meanwhile, your partner is left wondering which version of you is real, or whether anything they do will ever be enough. The way out isn't to suppress the urge to pull away or cling. That just creates more tension. Instead, start noticing the moment you're about to swing. That tightness in your chest when they're quiet, that urge to shut down or message late at night asking where this is going. That's your signal. Pause there. Breathe. Ask yourself what you actually need in that moment, not what you're afraid they'll take away. Real partnership happens when you can stay present instead of oscillating, and that starts with catching yourself mid-swing. Nervous system co-regulation. You know that feeling when someone you trust walks into a room and your shoulders drop? You weren't thinking about it. Your body just shifted. That is nervous system co-regulation happening in real time. And it is one of the deepest reasons why people stay close or why they pull away the moment things get fragile. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for safety, and the people around you are broadcasting signals whether they know it or not. When your partner is calm, grounded, present with you, your own system mirrors that safety. Your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, the chatter in your head quiets, but the reverse is equally true. If they are anxious, defensive, checked out, your body picks up on that faster than your conscious mind ever could. You tense, you hypervigilant, you start fighting or freezing without knowing why. Here is what makes this brutal in relationships. When someone is dysregulated, flooded, anxious, reactive, they cannot actually co-regulate you back. They can't offer the steadiness you need because they are drowning in their own system. And when you pull back from someone repeatedly because being around them leaves you more wound up than calm, you are not being cold or rejecting them. You are protecting your own nervous system's survival. The person who can stay somewhat regulated even when things are hard, who does not need you to absorb their panic before they can hear you, that person becomes magnetic. Not because they are perfect, but because proximity to them feels like safety. If you find yourself withdrawing from someone, it might be worth asking, is this about them as a person or about what my body learns when I am near them? That question can change everything. The vagal brake response. Your nervous system has a hidden escape hatch, and when someone you love gets too close or things feel too intense, that hatch swings open without you deciding it. This is the vagal brake, a biological circuit that literally tells your heart to slow down, your voice to flatten, your body to go still. It is not coldness. It is not choice. It is your nervous system slamming the brakes because something, maybe their anger, maybe their neediness, maybe just the weight of being truly seen, triggered a survival instinct that says, withdraw. The vagus nerve runs from your brain down through your chest and gut, and it has the power to downshift your whole system into a state of dissociation or shutdown. You have probably felt it. The conversation gets heated, and suddenly, you are not there anymore. Not angry, not defending, just gone. Your partner keeps talking to an empty room. Or maybe it happens slower, weeks of feeling watched or controlled, and one morning you wake up realizing you do not feel anything for them anymore. That flatness is the break. What makes this so cruel in relationships is that the person pulling away often does not know it is happening, and the person being left behind does not understand. It is biology, not rejection. They think, you do not love me anymore, but your nervous system is just protecting you the only way it knows how. By unplugging. The trap is that nobody teaches you to recognize the sensation before it locks in. If you can catch that first tightening in your chest, that first urge to go quiet, you have a shot at staying present instead of disappearing into the person you love. That pause is everything. Fight, flight, freeze in intimacy. Your partner says something that lands wrong, and suddenly your chest tightens. You might snap back, pack a bag, shut down completely, or disappear into your phone. None of those feels like choice in the moment. They feel like the only way to survive. That is your nervous system doing what it has done since you were small, protecting you by any means it can find. The issue is that fight, flight, and freeze were built for tigers, not for Tuesday night arguments. When your body perceives threat in intimacy, which could be a raised voice, a long pause, criticism, or even unexpected tenderness, it hijacks your prefrontal cortex and goes into survival mode. Fight looks like aggression or rage. Flight looks like leaving, picking a fight about something unrelated, or suddenly needing space forever. Freeze looks like going silent, going numb, or feeling like your body is not yours anymore. The person across from you is usually not the threat. They are just the person standing there when your old alarm system gets triggered. But here's what makes this tricky. Your partner does not see your nervous system activation. They see your behavior. They see you yelling, leaving, or shutting down, and their own system responds. Now both of you are running, and the actual closeness you both want is buried under two sets of survival instincts. The path forward is not to blame yourself for reacting. It is to recognize the pattern and give your nervous system what it actually needs. Slow breath, a moment to land back in your body, and the quiet knowledge that this person is safe. When you can pause there, even for 10 seconds, the whole dynamic shifts. Your partner becomes a partner again, not a threat. And that changes everything. Learned emotional suppression. Think about the last time someone you loved asked how you really felt, and you said fine when you weren't. Trace that backwards. When did fine become your default? Most of us didn't wake up one day and decide to swallow our feelings. It happened slowly, in small moments. A parent who went quiet when you cried. A sibling who used your tears as ammunition. A classroom where sadness looked weak. A workplace where frustration got you fired. Over years, your nervous system learned a simple equation. My emotions are not safe. Your body started doing what it was trained to do. It built a wall, not out of choice, but out of survival. The problem is that wall doesn't just block the bad feelings. It catches everything. Love, need, fear, joy. All of it gets stuck behind glass. Then you meet someone and they lean in close and ask for more of you and you freeze. Not because you don't want to give it, but because your body is saying no before your mind even knows what's happening. That suppression doesn't feel like suppression to you. It feels like being sensible, being strong, being safe. But your partner is on the other side of the glass, watching you disappear, and they don't understand why. You stop noticing you're doing it. You just notice they're pulling away and feel confused, even betrayed. But they're not running from you. They're running from the distance created by trying to reach through a wall you didn't know you'd built. The first step isn't fixing the wall. It's just looking at it, noticing when you go quiet, when you choose fine instead of truth, when your body locks up instead of leaning in. That small awareness is where the shift begins. The overwhelm withdrawal loop. You know that moment when your partner asks you something simple, how your day was, what you want for dinner, and suddenly you feel a wall go up inside you. Not anger, not distance exactly, just nothing, like you've run out of room in your own head. That's overwhelm withdrawal, and it happens so quietly that most people mistake it for losing interest in the relationship when actually they're drowning and don't know how to say it. When you're already at capacity, work, money stress, family stuff, your own anxiety, the arrival of another person's needs can feel less like connection and more like one more hand reaching into a pool that's already full. So you pull back. Not to hurt anyone, not deliberately. You pull back because giving anything more feels impossible, and the shame of not being able to show up makes it even worse. The trap is that your partner often reads this withdrawal as rejection and pushes harder or pulls away themselves, which makes you feel even more alone inside the overwhelm. So you retreat further. What makes it vicious is that overwhelm is often invisible from the outside. You don't look like you're struggling. You look cold, unavailable, checked out. Your nervous system is screaming that it cannot process one more input. The way out starts small, naming it before the loop tightens. Not when you're already silent and resentful, but when you first feel the walls starting to build. Saying, "I'm not running from you, I'm running on empty," changes everything. It shifts you from being the person who's pulling away to being the person who's asking for help. That one sentence can stop the story your partner tells themselves and remind them, and you, that this isn't the end of closeness. Stonewalling as self-protection. Your partner is asking you something real, something that matters. You feel heat rising, shame creeping up your neck, maybe anger you don't even know how to name, and then something just shuts off. You go quiet, not thoughtful quiet, empty quiet. You stare past them, or at your phone, or at nothing. They keep talking, and you just aren't there anymore. That's stonewalling. And here's what most people get wrong about it. It's not cruelty. Though it lands like cruelty, it's a nervous system screaming for a break it doesn't know how to ask for. When you were younger, maybe words were weapons. Maybe showing emotion meant getting hurt. Maybe the safest thing you learned was to disappear into silence rather than risk being seen and rejected. So now, when vulnerability knocks, your body doesn't negotiate. It just locks the door. The shutdown feels like protection in that moment. Your pulse is racing. Your amygdala is lit up like a fire alarm, and talking feels like walking into traffic. Going stone silent is your brain's way of saying, "I cannot survive this right now." But here's the cruel part. The person across from you doesn't experience your self-protection. They experience abandonment. Your silence feels like rejection to them, which often makes them push harder, which makes your nervous system push back harder. And suddenly, you're in a cycle where both of you are trying to protect yourselves and both of you feel betrayed. The first crack in that pattern starts when you can name what's actually happening inside you, not during the argument, but after, in the quiet. Not, "I was protecting myself, but I was overwhelmed." Not, "They pushed me away, but I disappeared." That tiny shift in awareness changes everything about how you come back to the conversation next time. The demand-withdraw pattern. Watch what happens when someone you love asks you to talk about something that matters. One person leans forward, the other leans back. The first person pushes harder, their voice gets tighter, maybe faster. The second person gets quieter, maybe leaves the room or changes the subject. And then, weirdly, the roles can flip. Whoever was pushing now feels abandoned and starts demanding closeness. Whoever was withdrawing now feels cornered and pulls away harder. This cycle has a name, but more importantly, it has a shape, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in almost every relationship that gets stuck. The demand-withdraw pattern is not really about the topic being fought over. It is about two people reacting to very different fears happening at the same time. One person fears abandonment, so they pursue. The other fears being swallowed or controlled, so they protect themselves by leaving. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. They are both trying to survive, but the faster one reaches, the harder the other pulls away. And the more someone withdraws, the more desperate the reaching becomes. It feels like proof that your partner does not care, when actually they are terrified of losing you. Or it feels like your partner is suffocating you, when really they are drowning and reaching for air. The way out is not to try harder at what you have been doing. It is to stop the cycle itself. Name it when you feel it starting. Tell your partner, I notice I am pushing and you are closing off. I do not want to do this dance tonight. Then pause. That tiny interruption, that awareness shared out loud, is sometimes enough to break the pattern and let two people find each other again. Pursuer and distancer dynamic. You know that feeling when one person in the relationship is always reaching, always asking where things stand, always needing reassurance, and the other person keeps pulling back, getting quieter, needing space. That's not random incompatibility, that's a pattern, and it feeds itself like a closed loop. The more the pursuer leans in, the more the distancer retreats. The more the distancer pulls away, the more frantic the pursuer becomes. Neither person is wrong. They're both just reacting to what the other person is doing, and the cycle gets tighter every time. Here's what happens underneath. The pursuer usually has an old fear of abandonment. They learned early that love requires constant vigilance, that if they don't show up and ask and push, they'll be left alone. The distancer often learned the opposite, that closeness is suffocating, that they need escape hatches and distance to feel like themselves. So when the pursuer moves closer out of fear, the distancer feels trapped and pulls harder. When the distancer retreats to breathe, the pursuer feels rejected and pursues harder. Each person's self-protection strategy is the other person's nightmare. The way out isn't for the pursuer to stop caring or for the distancer to suddenly become clingy. It's for both of them to get curious about what they're actually afraid of, not what the other person is doing wrong. The pursuer has to learn that reassurance doesn't come from outside verification. It comes from building their own ground. The distancer has to recognize that intimacy isn't a trap. It's a choice they can actually control. When either person pauses long enough to see the pattern instead of just react to it, the tightness starts to loosen. That awareness, even small, is often enough to shift the whole dynamic. Reactance to perceived control. You ask your partner to check in more often, and suddenly they go silent. You suggest a weekend plan, and they act like you've stolen their freedom. It feels like they're being difficult on purpose, but what's actually happening is far more automatic than spite. The moment someone feels their autonomy threatened, even slightly, a reflex fires in the human brain that looks almost identical to rebellion. Psychologists call it reactance, and it's a door that swings shut the moment you try to push it open. Here's the trap. The tighter you squeeze, the harder they pull. You think more requests or clearer expectations will close the gap, but from their side of the table, every boundary you draw feels like a cage shrinking. They're not choosing to withdraw because they don't care. They're withdrawing because caring itself feels like losing control. A text asking where they are becomes proof you don't trust them. A conversation about commitment feels like a deadline. Even love, when it comes with conditions or expectations, can flip from feeling like connection to feeling like a noose. The counterintuitive move is to loosen your grip, not because they deserve less attention, but because the grip itself is the problem. When you step back and give space without resentment, something strange happens. The threat dissolves. They can breathe. And when people can breathe, they often move toward you without being asked. This doesn't mean abandoning your needs or becoming passive. It means learning to ask for what you need without wrapping it in urgency or control. Tell them what you want, then let them choose. That choice, the one they make freely, is the only one that actually sticks. The paradox of relationships is that the things we tighten our fists around slip through our fingers, while the things we offer with open hands have a chance of being held. The autonomy threat response. You say something innocent. Maybe you suggest your partner try a different route to work or ask them to text when they arrive somewhere. Their response is sharp, defensive, completely out of proportion to what you actually said. What just happened is not about the route or the text. It was about control, or more precisely, the feeling of it. The moment someone feels their freedom shrinking, even by a hair, their nervous system goes hot. They pull away, not because they stopped caring, but because something primal just woke up inside them saying, I am losing myself. This is the autonomy threat response, and it runs much deeper than any single conversation. When we feel someone is limiting our choices, our space, or our right to decide for ourselves, we do not argue about the specific thing. We start protecting our sense of independence like it is under siege. The person pulling away is not trying to hurt you. They are trying to protect themselves from what feels like invisible walls closing in. But here is where it gets thorny. Autonomy threats feel radically different to different people. For one person, a partner checking in constantly feels like love and attention. For another, it feels like surveillance. One person hears a gentle suggestion and feels supported. Another hears those exact same words and feels managed, corrected, doubted, and most relationships go sideways right here. When one person pulls away to defend their freedom, the other person reads that distance as rejection and tightens their grip, which makes the autonomy threat worse, which makes them pull harder. The cycle becomes its own engine. The way out is not to abandon all structure or stop asking for anything. It is to notice, early, when someone starts retreating, and ask them directly, does this feel like I am trying to control you? Make space for them to say yes without you becoming defensive. Sometimes the pulling away stops the moment someone realizes their freedom was never actually on the line. Engulfment fear in closeness. You know the feeling when someone leans in too close during a conversation and you instinctively step back. That impulse to create space is not always about them. Sometimes it is about a deeper terror that closeness itself is a kind of drowning. Engulfment fear lives in people who worry that intimacy means losing themselves, that loving someone requires disappearing into that person's needs, preferences, and emotional gravity. It is not rational distance. It is survival mode triggered by the promise of connection. This usually roots in early experiences where closeness came tangled with control or enmeshment, where a parent's emotions became the child's job to manage, or where being needed felt identical to being trapped. Years later, when an adult partner reaches for genuine closeness, something inside them feels the old alarm, merge too much and you will vanish. So they pull away, not because they do not love the person across from them, but because they are protecting the fragile boundary between their own life and the other person's. The withdrawal is not coldness, it is fear wearing a mask of distance. What makes this trap so sticky is that pulling away actually creates the very abandonment they dread, which then confirms the original story. Closeness is dangerous. The person who loves them often feels rejected and confused, unaware they are watching someone wage a private war between the hunger for connection and the terror of disappearing inside it. If you recognize this in yourself, the exit is not to push through the fear or demand more closeness. It is to rebuild your own internal boundaries slowly, to practice being close without losing your shape, to trust that you can say no and still be loved, and to name the fear out loud so it stops controlling the distance. The intimacy-independence tension. There's a moment early in most relationships when you realize you want to spend time alone. Maybe it's a weekend, maybe it's just an evening. You might feel a tiny jolt of guilt the second you think it. That jolt is the collision between two real, legitimate needs, and it never goes away, no matter how long you've been together. The person you love wants closeness. You also want space. Both things are true. Both matter, and the dance between them is usually where distance starts creeping in, because most of us never learn to name it out loud. Here's what happens under pressure. One person leans toward connection, so the other leans toward independence. It looks like a game of tug, but it's not malice. It's physics. You pull closer because you feel your partner withdrawing. They pull away because they feel suffocated. Each move makes sense from the inside. Neither person is wrong. The problem is that we treat independence as a threat to love and intimacy as a threat to freedom, when they are actually both nutrients the relationship needs. The couples who don't slide into that pulling away trap usually do one unglamorous thing. They talk about the tension before resentment hardens it, not as a fight, but as a fact. I need some time alone this week, not as an apology or an excuse, but as a statement, and that stings a little, as an honest response. Also, without drama. The relationship doesn't die from that conversation. It gets a little more real. The pulling away slows down because neither person is secretly angry about a need they never said out loud. Space becomes a shared understanding instead of a silent accusation, and both people relax just enough to remember why they chose each other in the first place. Differentiation of self. Watch what happens when someone close to you goes quiet. Your chest tightens, your mind spirals, their mood becomes your emergency, and suddenly you're rearranging your entire day trying to fix something that might not even be about you. That's what happens when you're fused, when your emotional nervous system is so tangled with another person's that you can't tell where you end and they begin. Differentiation of self is the ability to hold your own beliefs, feelings, and goals even when someone you care about disagrees, disapproves, or falls apart. It's not about loving them less. It's about not becoming a thermostat for their emotional temperature, not absorbing their panic like a sponge, not abandoning yourself to keep them calm. When differentiation is low, you chase when they pull away because their distance feels like proof you're not enough. You soften your opinions so they won't reject you. You catch their anxiety like a contagion and spend the night soothing something that isn't yours to fix. The invisible trap is this. You think you're being loving when you're actually being reactive. Real intimacy doesn't come from two people merging into one. It comes from two people who can each hold their own ground, who can disagree without dissolving, who can see each other's pain without drowning in it. Differentiation builds slowly through small, unglamorous acts, saying what you actually think in a conversation, making a plan without checking if it pleases them first, staying calm when they're upset instead of catching their panic. It's not selfishness. It's the only ground worth standing on. The paradox lands quietly. The more separate you become, the closer you can actually get. You stop needing them to survive you, and suddenly you can actually love them without losing yourself in the process. Emotional fusion and enmeshment. You know that feeling when someone you love is sad, and suddenly their sadness becomes your sadness? Not empathy. Actual fusion, where you cannot tell where their feelings end and yours begin. You're not comforting them from the outside. You're drowning in the same water. That is fusion, and it looks like love until it becomes a trap. Enmeshment is what happens when two people live so tangled in each other's emotional reality that they lose the ability to exist as separate beings. You absorb their mood like weather. Their disappointment triggers your guilt. Their anger becomes your responsibility. And you mistake this for closeness. You believe merging is the price of safety, that losing yourself proves you care. But here is what nobody tells you. When you are fused with someone, you cannot actually love them, and you cannot protect yourself. You are too busy managing their interior world to notice when they hurt you. You rationalize their behavior because criticizing them feels like criticizing yourself. And when they pull away, when they need space, or recognize they want someone separate from them, you experience it as abandonment, not health. The person who built their whole stability on your fusion is retreating, and you have no self outside that fusion to land on. The way out is unglamorous and slow. You start by noticing where your feelings begin and where theirs do. You practice small disagreement without shame. You let them be wrong and unhappy without making it your job to fix. You build a life that belongs to you alone. It feels selfish at first because enmeshment trained you to believe that selfhood is betrayal. It is not. It is the only path to real connection, the kind that survives distance, disagreement, and the ordinary friction of being two whole people who choose each other anyway. Boundary collapse and retreat. Remember the moment when you stopped saying no? Not a dramatic blow-up, just a small surrender. You said yes when you meant no, or you let a comment slide that stung, or you rearranged your evening without being asked. It felt easier than the friction of pushing back, but something shifted in your nervous system that moment. Your body learned that your own edge doesn't matter as much as keeping the peace. And peace, it turns out, costs you something every time. Boundaries aren't walls you throw up to hurt people. They are the edges of your own aliveness, the places where you say, "This is mine," or "This hurts me," or "I need something different." When you collapse them, you are not being generous or mature. You are training yourself to disappear in small increments. And here's the part that lands hardest. Your partner feels it, not consciously at first. They feel the shift in your texture, the way your voice flattens a little, the way you are there, but not quite present. Attraction lives in aliveness. It lives in someone who knows their own shape. When you fold yourself smaller to fit their needs, to avoid their upset, to manage their emotions, you become someone they can't quite reach. Not because you are far away, but because you are not fully there. The retreat starts as a mercy. It ends as a wall they built, not you. The way back is not dramatic either. It is saying the small thing, the thing that matters to you, the thing that has a cost if you don't say it. It is watching what happens. Usually the relationship either reorganizes around your realness or it shows you exactly how little room there was for you in it. Both answers are worth knowing. The overfunctioning partner trap. You notice your partner hasn't texted their friend in months, so you send the text for them. Their paperwork piles up, so you organize it. They forget their own doctor's appointment, so you call. And you do all this with a kind of quiet momentum, not resentment yet, just the feeling that things run smoother when you take the wheel. Then one day they seem less interested in you, colder, more distant, and you cannot understand why, because you have been doing everything right. Here is what tends to happen in these arrangements. When one person steps in and runs the show, the other person slowly, almost without deciding to, steps out. They do not disappear because they are lazy or ungrateful. They disappear because their role in the relationship has become passenger. Your competence, your reliability, your need to make things work, all of it starts to feel like a wall between them and the relationship itself. They cannot fail. They cannot choose. They cannot even fully be needed, and something inside them quietly revolts against that. The trap is that you think you are showing love by taking on their share. But what you are actually doing is removing their stake in the partnership. You become the one who cares more, the one who is responsible, the one holding the fabric together, and they become the one being held. Over time, that becomes its own kind of distance. They pull away, not because you did too much, but because you left them too little to do. The way back is almost counterintuitive. It asks you to let some things break, to fail, to wait for them to choose you. That is not neglect. That is trust. It is the difference between running a life together and running a life for someone else. Underfunctioning and passivity. Spend enough time with someone and you'll notice who moves first. One person texts, one person plans. One person brings up the hard thing at dinner, and if you're the one always moving, you start to notice the other person isn't moving back. Not because they can't, but because they've learned it's safer to let you. Not out of laziness exactly. If you're not the one steering, you can't crash the boat, so they shrink. They wait for your texts instead of sending them. They don't plan dates. They don't bring up conversations. And something strange happens in the quiet. The person doing all the work gets resentful and alone, even with someone right there beside them. The passive one feels trapped because they've forgotten how to initiate, how to matter, how to show up. This cycle isn't about spite or laziness. It's about fear that learned to look like safety. Passivity often starts when someone doesn't believe their voice counts, or when trying felt too risky once, and now it feels safer to disappear into the background. But here's what gets missed. The more you underfunctioning, the more you actually shrink. You lose confidence. You become resentful of the other person for having all the power, even though you handed it to them on a silver platter, and your partner grows exhausted, carrying weight that was never meant to be theirs alone. If this is you, one small shift changes the whole geometry. Do one thing without being asked. Not perfectly, not big, just one. Make one call, plan one dinner, ask one real question that you actually want to know the answer to. Your partner doesn't need you to suddenly become the leader. They need to remember that you're still in the room, still capable, still choosing to be there. Compassion fatigue in couples. You know that feeling when you've been the strong one for too long, when you've held space for someone's pain, their fears, the weight of being their rock, and somewhere around month 3 or year 2, you just run out, not of love, of the fuel that lets you show up as the person they need. That's compassion fatigue, and it lives in the gap between still caring deeply and being too emptied to demonstrate it anymore. The thing nobody says out loud is that empathy has a tank, and tanks empty. Here's what makes it so dangerous. Your partner doesn't usually feel it coming. One day, you're present and attuned. The next day, your responses flatten. You listen, but you're elsewhere. You remember their story, but you can't summon the energy to validate how it hurt. They interpret this as withdrawal, as loss of interest, as proof you're fading. And you're not fading. You're depleted, but depletion and disconnection look identical from the other side. The problem spirals quietly because you're both responding to different signals. You're managing an internal tank gauge they can't see, and they're watching your behavior shift and writing a story about what it means. The real trap is that burnout from emotional labor often builds under the surface, especially if you're the one who naturally shoulders more of the holding and soothing. By the time you notice you're fried, your partner has already felt the shift and started their own defensive dance. The antidote isn't forcing yourself to care harder. It's getting honest about your limits before you hit the wall and inviting your partner into what's true instead of letting them assume you're simply pulling away. When someone knows you're running on empty, instead of secretly mad at them, the whole dynamic shifts. The empathy depletion point. You've had the day from hell. Work ambushed you. Someone cut you off in traffic. You're running on 3 hours of sleep and cold coffee. Then your partner walks in and tells you about their frustration, and you just can't. Not because you don't love them, not because you don't care, but because something in you has hit a wall and there's nothing left to give. That moment is real. That wall is empathy depletion, and it's not a character flaw. It's a finite resource, running dry. Here's what most people don't understand. Empathy is neurologically expensive. Holding someone else's feelings, imagining their perspective, regulating your own reactions to make space for theirs. That takes energy, real energy. And when you're depleted, whether from work stress, sleep loss, emotional labor, or just the accumulated weight of being alive, your empathy tank empties faster than you'd expect. You stop being able to imagine the other person's pain with the same vividness. Their words start to feel like demands instead of communication. Withdrawal looks like coldness, but it's often just exhaustion wearing a mask. The trap is that your partner feels it and pulls back too. They sense the flatness, interpret it as rejection, and suddenly you're both retreating into separate corners, each believing the other has simply stopped caring. The relationship shrinks not from lack of love, but from the invisible depletion of the very capacity that holds closeness together. The move here is small, but critical. When you feel that wall rising, name it before it calcifies. Tell them you're running on fumes, that you need 30 minutes alone, that your empathy is temporarily offline, not theirs. That honesty often unlocks theirs too, and two empty people can sit together without mistaking silence for abandonment. Emotional labor imbalance. You know that feeling when you're the one always asking how someone's day went, always the first to apologize, always the one who remembers the anniversary or notices when something's off. And they just exist. They show up, but the work of holding the relationship together falls on you like a weight nobody asked you to carry. That imbalance is emotional labor, and it's one of the quietest ways people start to resent each other. It's not cheating or betrayal. It's the slow erosion that happens when one person is doing twice the emotional maintenance the other one is doing. One partner reads the room, manages conflict, remembers what matters, smooths over tension, while the other coasts on the energy someone else is generating. Over time, the person carrying all that work starts to feel less like a partner and more like a life coach, a therapist, a cruise director. You give, and somewhere around the third time you're the only one reaching out after an argument, something in you starts to calculate. Is this worth it? The trap is that you don't always see it happening. You think you're just being loving or thoughtful, but love without reciprocal effort isn't love. It's labor. The pull away usually isn't sudden fury. It's a slow fade that looks like you stop initiating. You answer texts shorter. You make plans that don't include them. You pour your emotional energy somewhere it feels mutual. Resentment rarely comes from big betrayals alone. It comes from the 1,000 small moments where you felt unseen, where your effort went unmatched. If you're recognizing this now, the smallest next step isn't to give more, it's to name it, not as an accusation, but as something you both need to see. Who is doing the emotional work here, and why? That conversation often changes everything. Invisible mental load resentment. You walk into the kitchen and notice the sink is full again. Your partner made dinner. That's good, but nobody reminded the kids about their permission slips. Nobody blocked out time for the car appointment. Nobody thought ahead to whether there's enough milk for tomorrow morning. You didn't say anything. You never do. But something tightened in your chest, and it stayed there through the evening. That tightness is the beginning of resentment that has almost nothing to do with the dishes, and almost everything to do with the weight of invisible work, the constant quiet accounting that happens inside one person's head while the other person sleeps easy. Mental load isn't about tasks. It's about the burden of remembering, planning, and deciding on behalf of the household. One person holds the calendar. One person notices when we're running low. One person thinks, "What's next?" while the other thinks, "What's in front of me right now?" The person carrying it rarely names it. They hint, they get sharp, they sigh, they pull away slowly, not because they stopped loving the other person, but because they've been running a solo operation while sitting next to someone who has no idea it's even happening. The person on the other side often doesn't see it because invisible work looks like nothing. No mess, no deadline, no voice. So they think the resentment is random, unfair, personal, but it's not. It's the sound of someone collapsing under care that nobody asked them to carry alone. If you recognize yourself in either role, the move is direct. Name the mental load out loud. Make it visible. Ask which pieces are being held alone, then redistribute them, not as a favor, but as a fact of partnership. That's when the tightness in your chest begins to release. Scorekeeping and reciprocity decay. Midnight calls you answered, rain you drove through, the same 3 stories about their boss you listened to without a single sigh. You remember all of it, and when you needed something real, suddenly they were busy, distant, untouchable. The math breaks down, and you're furious, but your brain was running a silent ledger in the background the whole time, without you knowing it was happening. And somewhere along the way, the imbalance stopped feeling like generosity and started feeling like a debt nobody wanted to pay. Scorekeeping begins so quietly, you miss it entirely. You do something kind, and your nervous system holds space for the possibility that it matters, that someone noticed, that the world owes you a small credit back. Most of us never say this part out loud. We tell ourselves we're just being the reliable one, the person who shows up, but the ledger is always working underneath, keeping track. Reciprocity decay is where the real damage happens. The longer you give without proportional return, the more resentment hardens into something that looks exactly like pulling away. You become careful. You stop offering so freely. You match their effort exactly or offer less, testing whether they'll finally step up. They feel that shift immediately, even if they can't name it. They don't know why, but they sense the warmth is measured now, conditional, held back. So they pull back too, and what started as silent mathematics becomes a frozen wall between you. The scorekeeping was meant to protect you from being taken for granted, but instead, it locked the whole thing in place. The real move isn't to ignore genuine imbalance. Some relationships truly are unequal. It's to name what you're feeling before the ledger becomes permanent. Say it out loud, even if it's scary. I've given a lot, and I'm feeling stuck. That honesty, that small vulnerability, is where actual reciprocity begins. The gratitude erosion effect. You remember the first time they did it. Maybe they brought you tea without asking. Maybe they drove across town to pick something up. Maybe they just showed up when you needed them. That moment felt like proof. Proof that you mattered, that they were choosing you, that something real was happening. You felt it in your chest, and then it happened again and again, and somewhere in the repetition, the magic leaked out, not because they stopped trying, not because you stopped caring, but because your nervous system stopped announcing it as an event. The brain is a prediction machine, and once it predicts something, it stops flagging it as news. That cup of tea becomes the baseline, their presence becomes the expected condition, and the absence of it, that's what gets your attention now, not the presence. This is gratitude erosion, and it creeps into long relationships quietly, without a single moment you can point to and call the turning. It does not feel like betrayal or cruelty. It feels like the slow fade of noticing. You stop saying thank you, not because you are ungrateful, but because your brain categorizes their consistency as obligation instead of gift. They start to feel invisible in their own love, and invisible people begin to pull away, not in anger, but in quiet. They give less, not out of spite, but because consistent thanklessness feels like a signal that the gift was never received at all. The antidote is simple, but requires real intention. Interrupt the prediction. Name it, not as a transaction or a performance, but as actual noticing. I see that you do this. I feel the weight of it. That specific observation is what breaks the erosion and reminds both of you that consistency is still a choice, still a gift, still worth the work to see. Habituation to a partner. You remember the first time your partner texted you, how you'd read it twice, feel that small warmth spreading, maybe even show it to a friend. Now a text lands and you're glancing at it while stirring dinner, replying in shorthand. Moving on. Nothing about your partner changed. The words probably hit just as hard at a practical level, but the sensation evaporated. This is habituation, and it's not what love dying looks like. It's just how your nervous system works. Your brain evolved to notice novelty and alarm itself at constancy. A new sound in the house at 3 a.m. wakes you instantly. The refrigerator hum never does, even though it runs all night. The same mechanism that keeps you sane is the one making your partner's presence feel invisible. The trap, mistaking invisible for gone. You stop reaching for their hand because your hand is already there. You stop noticing the way they move because they're not a stranger anymore. You still feel something when they laugh, but you've stopped registering the feeling the way you did at month 2. Then one day you wonder if you ever felt it at all. But here's what matters. Habituation is not love's opposite. It's its infrastructure. If you spent 3 years holding that month 2 intensity, you'd shatter from the effort. Real relationships thicken not because feeling fades, but because trust runs deep enough that you can finally stop scanning for exit signs. The pull away usually starts when someone mistakes this deepening for disappearance, when the absence of fireworks feels like proof the fire's gone. Next time that flatness creeps in, try one small thing. Do something together you haven't done in months, something that breaks the usual rhythm. That small jolt wakes your nervous system back up. It reminds you both that this person still contains surprise, that familiarity and discovery aren't opposites. The Coolidge effect explained. There's a story about President Calvin Coolidge that may or may not be true, but it made the rounds at parties for decades. He and the First Lady were touring a farm when a rooster mounted the same hen repeatedly. Someone asked if Coolidge could learn anything from that display of stamina. He supposedly replied without hesitation, "Ask him if it's the same hen every time." That quip became the name for something neuroscientists actually study: the Coolidge effect, that electric surge of sexual interest that ignites the moment novelty walks in, even when nothing else changes. Your brain doesn't evaluate whether your partner is right for you based on character or kindness. It evaluates familiarity. And to the old wiring in your skull, familiar means done, solved, move on. You've memorized their face, you know their body. The gap between what you expect and what happens, that gap where desire lives, collapses. Many people mistake this neurological fact for relationship failure. They think the spark dying means they picked wrong or fell out of love, or that the whole thing was false. But the spark was never about love. It was dopamine responding to the unknown, that chemical zip of not knowing what comes next. When you've mapped someone completely, the hit stops. Most people respond by chasing novelty elsewhere or concluding the relationship itself was a mistake. There's a quieter third option, though it requires work. You can deliberately rebuild small unknowns together. Travel to a place neither of you knows. Ask questions that break your usual patterns. Try conversations you've both sidestepped. The point isn't to manufacture fakeness. It's recognizing that the person you know intimately still contains unexplored terrain, and your nervous system remains wired to want discovery. The person hasn't changed. Your access to them can. Novelty and desire decline. Think back to the first time you touched someone you really wanted. Your skin was electric. Your nervous system lit up. A text from them made your phone feel warm. Now fast forward 2 years or 5 years, and that same text lands the same way it always does. You read it while doing something else. That electricity didn't go anywhere because it was never really about them. It was about the newness, the uncertainty, the feeling of discovering someone for the first time. Your brain is a prediction machine. It runs on the dopamine rush of surprise and the thrill of the unknown. Once your partner becomes predictable, and they will, because you spend time with them and learn how they move, what they say, when they laugh, your nervous system stops flooding itself with that chemical. You can anticipate their text. You know what they'll order. You've heard their stories. None of this means the love has died. It means your brain has stopped treating them like a mystery that needs solving. The trap is mistaking this perfectly normal neurological shift for a sign that something is broken. So you pull back, start wondering if the spark is gone, begin checking your attention like you'd check a battery, and pulling back, that little coldness, that shift in effort, becomes the thing that actually triggers your partner to pull away and return. Because now you're creating real distance instead of accepting the natural one that comes when desire burns down from wildfire to hearth. The move is not to chase novelty or hunt for old feelings. It's to notice that desire has a different shape now, quieter and steadier, and that's not failure. It's just how a nervous system learns to be at home with another person. The mere exposure paradox. You're sitting across from someone you've known for years, and something strange happens. Their laugh, the one that charmed you 100 times before, now lands like static. The habit you used to find endearing, the way they always rearrange your kitchen or return to the same 5 opinions, has shifted from texture into texture you notice too much. Nothing about them actually changed. What shifted is how visible they've become to you. This is the mere exposure paradox, and it cuts against everything we're taught to believe about love. The original research was clean and simple. See a face more often, like it more. But real relationships don't work in a lab. When exposure happens in the thick of daily life, tangled up with friction and boredom and small resentments that pile like dust, the formula flips. You've learned them so thoroughly that mystery evaporates. Their patterns are now completely legible. You can predict what they'll say before they say it. Novelty dies, and with it, the spark that keeps attention alive. They become background hum until something breaks and you realize with a shock that you feel almost nothing. The gap between what should happen and what does happen, that's where the paradox lives. Exposure was supposed to deepen affection, but instead it just built an inventory of all the small ways they disappoint you. The trap is thinking the answer is distance. It's not. It's unpredictability. A conversation that isn't about logistics or whose turn it is to fix something. Genuine curiosity about who they're becoming, not who they've been. Small moments where they surprise you again. When you stop treating someone like a puzzle you've already solved and start treating them like a person still becoming, familiarity stops feeling like a cell and starts feeling like a room you choose to stay in. Familiarity breeds invisibility. You know the feeling. You've been with someone for years and one day you realize you can't remember the last time you really looked at them. Not glanced, looked. When you first met, every detail mattered. The way they laughed, how they held their coffee, whether they were nervous or certain. Now they're just there, moving through your shared space like furniture you no longer see. This isn't cruelty or falling out of love. This is what happens when the nervous system stops treating someone as novel. The brain is a prediction machine. Once it knows what to expect, it stops burning energy on perception. Your partner's voice becomes background. Their expressions blend into the daily hum. You could walk past them in a hallway and not register their face because your brain already knows what's there. The safety that drew you together, the predictability, the comfort of knowing them, becomes the very thing that makes them disappear from your conscious attention. And here's what cuts deep. They feel this erasure, not as a sharp betrayal, but as a slow fade. They start talking more because you're not really listening. They change small things about themselves, hoping you'll notice. They pull closer or pull away because the invisibility becomes unbearable. The pulling away you're scared of often starts here, not with them losing interest in you, but with you losing the habit of actually seeing them. There's a small reset available, and it doesn't require grand gestures. What matters is the random 5-minute moment where you catch their face when they're thinking about something else, where you ask what they're actually worried about today and listen the way you did when you barely knew them. You don't need to feel the old electricity again. You just have to remember that they're not furniture, that they're still changing, that they're still worth the simple act of really looking. The idealization devaluation swing. 3 months in, you suddenly notice how they chew, how they text back in hours, not minutes. The way their ambitions fit into a smaller box than you imagined. You've swung from angel to ordinary so fast it feels like a lie, like they showed you one person and switched to another without warning. They didn't. Your brain did. This movement between putting someone on a pedestal and dropping them into the basement is not about loving poorly or being fooled. It's how attraction works when it's built on fantasy instead of steady attention. Early on, you fill the gaps in what you don't yet know. You imagine their depth, their humor, their capacity to understand you in ways nobody else can. Your nervous system floods with dopamine, the chemical of new reward, of arrival, and it feels like truth. Your brain is not lying. It's just working with incomplete information and filling the silence with your own hope. Then you start seeing the actual person. The actual person is smaller than the myth. Not worse, not a liar, not fundamentally changed. Just human and limited, like everyone who walks around inside skin. The trap is that by then, your attachment system has already locked onto an impossible standard. When reality lands, it reads as betrayal, even though they haven't moved an inch. So you pull away, or you pull them closer and demand they stay mythical. Both moves drain the relationship. The way through is learning to notice when you're painting rather than looking. Does this person make you feel seen, or do they make you feel like you're admiring your own reflection in their eyes? Can you stay curious about who they actually are, not who fills the empty spaces? That distinction will tell you almost everything about whether this swinging eventually softens into something durable. Projection of unmet needs. You meet someone and immediately sense all the things they could fill. The way they listen, the steadiness in their voice, the humor that lands exactly right. What you don't realize yet is that you are not seeing them. You are seeing a hole inside yourself and painting your own hunger onto their shape. It happens fast. Within weeks, you believe they understand you in ways no one else ever has, which moves suspiciously quick for someone still learning your name. Their silence becomes thoughtfulness instead of fatigue. Their distance reads as depth when really they are just tired or overwhelmed or thinking about something else entirely. Then something small breaks. They disappoint you. Nothing catastrophic, just normal life. And you feel betrayed, as if they violated a contract neither of you signed. The sting is real, but its source is usually not what you think it is. You projected your hunger for unconditional presence onto someone human, someone with their own limits and exhaustion and bad days. When they failed to be the endless emotional well you imagined, you read it as evidence they were not who you thought. But they were never who you thought. You were lonely. They arrived, and you filled the gaps with what you were starving for. Here's the trap. The more desperately you needed them to be that person, the more certain you became that they actually were. Projection feels like sight. It feels like finally understanding someone completely, but what you have really done is stopped looking at who they are. Next time someone feels like they truly see you, pause before building an altar. Ask what you are actually watching versus what you need to be true right now. That question alone can interrupt the whole pattern before you construct a version of them no human could possibly survive being. Transference of old wounds. A text goes unanswered. Your chest tightens. Suddenly you're 13, watching your mother leave for work without saying goodbye, and you're small and unseen. Nothing in this moment is actually about the phone. Your nervous system hijacked the present and dressed it in the clothes of the past. This is transference. You grab an old hurt and drape it over someone who isn't the person who caused it, and it happens so fast you don't notice the swap. Your partner becomes your absent parent, your critical teacher, the friend who betrayed you. The feeling is real, so the story feels true, and you genuinely believe you're reacting to what's happening now. But you're not. You're in a memory, and your current relationship is just the screen it's playing on. What makes this so sticky in long-term relationships is simple. The closer someone gets to you, the more likely they'll accidentally step on one of those old wounds. When they do, something in you feels like proof they were always going to hurt you the way that person did. So you pull away, or you rage, or you go quiet, and they feel it as rejection, not realizing they've become a stand-in for someone else's crime. The move that changes this doesn't require therapy or years of insight. When you feel that spike of hurt or anger, pause long enough to ask yourself something real. Is this about them, or is this about then? Is the evidence in front of you, or is it living in your history? You won't always know the answer immediately, but the question itself breaks the trance. It gives you a moment to separate the past from the person in front of you, and that space, that tiny gap between the trigger and the truth, is where most relationships actually get saved. The parent-shaped partner filter. You meet someone and something about them makes you feel safe. Maybe it's the way they listen without rushing you, or how they handle your mess without flinching, or the quiet competence when things get hard. What you don't realize is that you've already cast them in a role, not as a lover or a real person, but as a corrected version of what you needed and didn't get. This is the parent-shaped filter, and it runs almost invisibly until it doesn't. We don't choose partners from a blank slate. We choose them through a lens ground by years of what we learned to need. Reassurance from an absent parent becomes the partner who must always check in. Chaos in childhood becomes attraction to someone organized and controlling. Emotional coldness becomes a lover you're convinced you can finally reach. The partner isn't bad. They're just being projected on. They're walking around inside your narrative, not their own. Here's where it breaks. The moment they step out of the role, they have a bad day and can't listen perfectly. They get tired of reassuring. They make a mistake that shakes your sense that they're the stable one. And suddenly, you're angry at them for something they never promised to be. They're not abandoning you. They're just being human, which was never part of the contract you wrote in your head. The pull away often starts here, because once you see them as themselves instead of the parent-shaped savior, you have a choice. Stay with the real person, or chase the feeling of being rescued. Most people chase the feeling. Before you do, ask yourself what you're actually looking for. A partner or a second chance at healing someone else was supposed to handle. Reenactment of childhood scripts. You meet someone and feel instantly at home or instantly on guard. 3 months in, you realize you are playing a role you learned before you could talk. Your partner says something that lands sideways, and suddenly you are 8 years old again, waiting for a parent to come back from a bad mood, or bracing for a raised voice you saw coming from across the room. Childhood is not just a time that ends. It is a script that runs in the background of every close relationship you build. If your parent withdrew when hurt, you might find yourself doing the same thing, pulling back into silence the moment conflict touches you. If affection came with strings and conditions, you might love someone while keeping one hand on the exit, waiting for the bill to come due. If you learned that your needs were inconvenient, you might ghost someone who is clingy, even though part of you is desperate for that same closeness. The trap is that these patterns feel like your personality, not your history. They feel like the truth about who you are with other people, when really they are instructions written by people who did their best with what they knew. The quieter realization is that your partner might have a completely different script running, one from a family where conflict meant closeness or where silence meant abandonment. When two scripts collide, neither person feels seen. You are both just reenacting, waiting for the other person to play the role that would finally make it safe. The first move is not dramatic. It is just noticing when the old script shows up, naming it without shame, and asking whether this reaction belongs to now or to then. That gap between script and present is where actual choice lives. The repetition compulsion. You swear you'll never date someone emotionally unavailable, then you find yourself 3 years in with someone who barely speaks to you. You promised yourself your next partner wouldn't criticize the way you eat, and somehow you're with someone who does exactly that. It's not bad luck, it's repetition compulsion. The part of you that learned love as a certain kind of pain, and now your nervous system recognizes that pain as home. Freud spotted it in trauma survivors who kept recreating their earliest wounds. But you don't have to survive a war or abuse for this to grab you. A parent who was distant, you chase distance. A parent who was critical, you seek criticism. A parent who was loving but unreliable, you partner with someone brilliant and withholding, spending years trying to unlock them. The cruel logic is that your brain wants to solve the old problem, thinking that if you can finally make the unavailable person available, you rewrite the childhood story and get the happy ending you didn't get then. So you stay longer than you should. You try harder. You become smaller, flexible, invisible, whatever it takes. And each time it doesn't work, instead of leaving, you tighten your grip. The pattern repeats because the payoff is not the relationship itself. It's the chance to win something you lost long ago. The way out is not white-knuckling into a different type of person. It's noticing when you feel that old magnetic pull, that sense that someone's coldness is actually a puzzle you're supposed to solve. That pull is your childhood knocking. When you feel it, pause and ask yourself what you're really after. The person in front of you cannot be your parents, no matter how much you need them to be. Unconscious attraction to unavailability. You notice you're most interested in someone right after they pull back. The moment they're busy, the moment they don't text back right away, the moment they mention an ex or hint they're not looking for anything serious. Suddenly they're magnetic. That little spike of wanting them more hits before you even realize it's happening. It's not random and it's not love. It's a pattern your nervous system learned early, coded into how you read safety and desire. When someone is fully available, fully interested, fully transparent, there's nothing to chase. No mystery, no uncertainty that keeps your attention locked on them like a puzzle you need to crack. But unavailability triggers the same part of your brain that remembers a song that got cut off, that comes back to a conversation where something felt unsaid. You lean in, you interpret their distance as depth, their coldness as selectiveness, their mixed signals as proof they're rare and worth pursuing. That chase itself feels like love. The intensity, the obsessing, the way you can't stop thinking about them. You mistake that spinning for passion, but it's compulsion. People who grew up around inconsistent love, a parent who was sometimes warm and sometimes distant, affection that arrived unpredictably, are especially tuned to this. Their nervous system learned that love meant chasing, that it meant decoding mixed signals, that it meant proving yourself worthy of someone unsure about you. So now they're drawn to people who recreate that exact dynamic, not because they want suffering, but because suffering is familiar, and familiar feels like home. Here's what actually shifts things. Notice when you feel more interested in someone, the less available they are, not as a character flaw, but as a signal. A flag your nervous system is running an old script. The people who are actually safe, clear, and genuinely interested might feel boring at first. Too easy, but that ease is not a sign they're wrong. It's what trust actually feels like. The scarcity-driven pursuit. Watch what happens when someone you love becomes less available, not because they're angry, just busier, more distant, caught in their own world. Suddenly, your phone feels heavy. You find reasons to reach out. You plan what to say. A text that would have felt casual 3 months ago now feels like an investment. You're chasing something that's already moving away, and the chase itself becomes the whole relationship. This isn't about love burning hotter. It's a sign a phone to buy down. It's about the gap between what you want and what you can have. Scarcity makes wanting sharp. It makes the ordinary feel urgent. When someone is fully there, present, responsive, your nervous system relaxes. There's no threat, so there's no spike. But when they pull back, when texts go unanswered for hours, when plans feel like negotiations instead of assumptions, your brain switches into acquisition mode. You become the pursuer. And here's the trap that ruins so many relationships. The more you pursue, the more they often pull away, not because they stopped caring, but because pursuit feels like pressure, like being chased, like they're wanted only when scarce. The dynamic locks. You're addicted to the chase. They're allergic to the pressure. Neither of you is actually chasing the person anymore. You're both chasing the feeling. You're chasing security through closeness. They're chasing freedom through distance. The way out isn't to stop wanting them back. It's to stop treating their withdrawal as proof of their worth. When someone's distance makes them feel more valuable to you, you've already handed them the power to regulate how much you love yourself. What if instead you kept pursuing your own life with the same intensity, not as punishment, as remembering that scarcity is temporary, and so is the need to chase it? Intermittent reinforcement bonding. You know that feeling when someone goes quiet for 2 days, then suddenly sends you the sweetest message? Your chest lifts. They care. They were just busy. And right then, you're more attached than you were before they disappeared. This is not accident. Your brain just wired itself tighter around unpredictable reward, the same mechanism casinos built empires on. When affection arrives on schedule, every morning coffee, every Friday date, your nervous system files it away as steady and reliable. But when love comes and goes like weather, when you never know if today brings warmth or silence, everything shifts. Your brain stays alert, waiting, hoping. A text back in 3 hours hits different than one in 30 seconds because scarcity rewired what your brain prizes. The unpredictability becomes the drug. Here is where it cuts deepest in a relationship. If someone pulls away sometimes, but comes back other times, canceling plans, then planning a weekend away, ignoring you, then fully present, you don't conclude they're inconsistent and leave. You think, I need to figure out what makes them come back. I'll work harder. Your brain is now chasing, not choosing. The other person might not intend this. They might be stressed, scattered, drowning in their own life. But the pattern locks in anyway, and the person receiving intermittent closeness feels more bonded than someone in a consistently warm relationship. Not because the love is greater, but because uncertainty changed the wiring. If you catch yourself feeling relief or euphoria when someone returns after ghosting you, that is the signal. That is your nervous system telling you the attachment is running on variable reinforcement now, and you are no longer safe. You are in a slot machine, pulling the lever, waiting for the next payout. The trauma bond mechanism. You know that person you can't quite leave, even though your friends keep asking why you stay. The one where the good moments feel impossibly good and the bad moments feel like your whole world is collapsing. That push-pull cycle, where pain and relief are so tightly woven together that you can't feel one without the other. That is a trauma bond at work. It sounds dramatic, but the mechanism is neurologically elegant and deeply human. When someone hurts you and then comforts you, your brain doesn't file those as separate events. Instead, it locks them together. The adrenaline spike from the fight, the cortisol flood, the desperation when they withdraw, and then the dopamine rush when they come back. Your nervous system learns to crave that entire cycle. You become addicted, not to the person, but to the biochemical pattern they trigger in you. Trauma bonds don't require abuse to form. They build anywhere there is high emotional intensity mixed with intermittent reinforcement. Inconsistency, unpredictability, rare moments of deep connection, punctuated by stretches of confusion or distance. You are not weak for feeling trapped in one. You are experiencing exactly what your body was designed to do when survival feels like it depends on staying connected to someone. The way out is not willpower or shame. It is recognition, actually seeing that your attachment is bonded to a neurological pattern rather than to genuine safety. When you notice that pattern for what it is, you can ask yourself something different. What would wanting someone look like like if they were reliably there, if you didn't have to hold your breath waiting for them to disappear, if connection didn't come wrapped in chaos. That shift away from the familiar ache and toward actual stability, that is where freedom begins. Dopamine and unpredictable reward. You know that feeling when you text someone and wait for the reply, refreshing your phone every few seconds, even though you know it will take time. That itch, that lean forward energy. Your brain doesn't actually fire dopamine when you get the reward. It fires dopamine in anticipation of maybe getting one. This is the variable ratio schedule, the same mechanism that keeps people pulling slot machine handles. Predictability kills desire faster than almost anything else. If your person always replies in 3 minutes, your nervous system settles. Boring. But if they sometimes reply in 3 minutes, sometimes in 3 hours, sometimes take a full day, sometimes send long messages, sometimes send nothing, your brain stays in that hungry, alert state. It's not that they're emotionally unavailable. It's that their unpredictability has become the drug. This is why people often pull away when things become steady. The reward, the certainty that they care, that they'll show up, that the relationship is solid, is actually less stimulating than the anxiety-tinged possibility that maybe they won't. Relationships that feel boring to one person are often just ones where the reward has become predictable. And here's the trap. You can't manufacture unpredictability on purpose without creating real toxicity. You can't intentionally ghost them sometimes to keep them hooked. That's the lie people tell themselves when they confuse attachment with love. What you can do is notice when you're chasing the dopamine hit of uncertainty rather than the actual presence of the person. Ask yourself if you are in love with them or addicted to the chase. Ask whether the person themselves still excites you or whether you're only excited by the not knowing. That distinction might save you years of waiting for someone who's learned to love the game more than the person sitting across from them. The chase and withdraw cycle. You text. They take 3 hours to reply, so you wait longer before sending the next one. Now you're both playing a game nobody consciously entered, and it feels like a test of who cares less. The truth is far stickier than that. One person pulls back because they feel smothered or afraid of losing themselves. The other person pushes harder because the distance feels like rejection, like proof they're not worth staying for. Each move triggers the other. Pursuit looks like neediness. Withdrawal looks like indifference. Both are actually fear wearing different masks. What makes this cycle so brutal is that both partners are acting on real pain, just in opposite directions. The pursuer feels abandoned and speeds up, desperate to close a gap that only widens with each attempt. The withdrawer feels cornered and pulls further, needing space to breathe. Neither one is trying to hurt the other. They're both trying to survive. But the dance keeps going. Advance, retreat, until both feel exhausted and misunderstood. The way out is almost counterintuitive. The pursuer has to step back and build a life that doesn't orbit around the other person's availability. The withdrawer has to stay present instead of vanishing into their own head, not as punishment or to win, but because the cycle only breaks when someone interrupts the pattern. It takes the person who feels most desperate to act the least desperate. That move, paradoxically, is what actually changes the room. Here's what most people miss. The first person to get calm usually gets their partner back, not through manipulation, but because safety itself is contagious. When one person stops transmitting panic, the other can finally exhale. You don't repair this by trying harder, you repair it by trying differently. Wanting versus liking systems. You know that feeling when you want something so badly you can taste it, but the moment you get it, the hunger just vanishes. That's not weakness or weirdness. That's your brain running two completely separate systems, and they rarely agree on what's good for you. The wanting system fires up in your dopamine centers when you anticipate a reward. It's all about pursuit and craving, the electricity of not quite having. The liking system activates when you actually experience something pleasurable. It's quieter, slower, more satisfied, content to simply be. One makes you chase, the other makes you rest. In relationships, this split becomes especially brutal. You want the person you can't have. The distance, the inconsistency, the emotional unavailability all trigger that wanting machinery into overdrive. Your brain floods with dopamine as you strategize ways to win them over. Reinterpret their coldness as shyness. Convince yourself their distance means you haven't tried hard enough yet. Meanwhile, the liking system doesn't light up much during that pursuit. Actual contentment, genuine ease, shared laughter without strategy. Those activate the quieter reward pathways that build real attachment and security. But here's the trap. Wanting feels more alive than liking. The chase feels like love. The uncertainty feels like passion. So you stay stuck chasing people who, even if you caught them fully, wouldn't make you happy, because happiness isn't what your wanting system is really after. It's after the dopamine hit of the pursuit itself. If you find yourself repeatedly drawn to emotionally distant partners, the move isn't to shame yourself for bad taste or lack of self-worth. It's to develop a clearer eye. Are you liking this person or just wanting them? Because those are two different nervous systems running on two different fuels, and only one of them builds a life you actually want to wake up in tomorrow. Limerence and its collapse. You wake at 3 in the morning thinking about them again. Their voice, their laugh, the way they tilted their head when listening. Every conversation plays on repeat and you rewrite it better next time. You imagine futures together in a car, them seeing you as you want to be seen. This is limerence. What most of us mistake for love, but is actually obsession dressed up like poetry. It's the chemical high of possibility, your nervous system flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine, your brain treating another person like a drug that might fix everything incomplete in you. The brutal part isn't the feeling itself, it's how fast it dies when reality cracks. Maybe they cancel plans, maybe they laugh at something you said and suddenly you hear it differently. Not charming, but mean. Maybe they're just busy, human, and therefore disappointing. The collapse doesn't come slow, it comes fast. The same chemicals that flooded your system drain out. The future you built in your head turns to dust, and you cannot remember why their voice mattered at all. This is where people pull away hardest. Not from love, but from the wreckage of limerence. When the drug wears off, you're left alone with a quiet truth. You were never seeing them clearly. You were seeing your own needs, your own emptiness, your own hunger for completion, reflected back like a mirror you mistook for a window. Real intimacy starts on the other side of this collapse, when you can see another person without the narcotic blur and still choose to stay. Most people never get there. They just chase the high again with someone new, confusing the crash with proof that person wasn't right. But the problem was never them. It was the addiction. The infatuation half-life. You know that moment, maybe 3 or 4 months in, when you realize you haven't checked your phone in 15 minutes while sitting across from them, or when you remember, oh right, they exist in the world outside our conversations too, and that fact doesn't immediately collapse into anxiety. That shift is not a sign you've fallen out of love. That shift is chemistry losing its mind-altering properties, and it feels like loss because it actually is. The loss of a specific neurochemical state. In the early weeks of real attraction, your brain is soaked in dopamine and norepinephrine, chemicals designed to make you obsessive, sleepless, and convinced this person is somehow different from every other human. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that makes rational decisions, goes quiet. You literally cannot see their flaws clearly, and that's not poetry. That's neurobiology. But here's what most people miss. This state has an expiration date, and it's built in. The infatuation half-life, the time it takes for that chemical intensity to drop to half its peak, is usually somewhere between 6 and 18 months. Not forever, not even close. And when it starts to fade, people panic. They mistake the fading of obsession for the fading of love, so they chase it. They pick fights to feel something. They manufacture drama. They scroll their partner's social media looking for the spark of those early texts. Some people even leave, thinking they've fallen out of love, when really, they've just fallen out of a temporary, altered state. The trick is knowing the difference between the neurochemistry cooling down and the actual relationship deteriorating. One is inevitable. The other is a choice. When that chemical volume knob turns down, you finally get to meet the person you actually picked. Passionate to companionate shift. You used to text them something random at 2 a.m. just because they crossed your mind, and they'd write back in seconds. Now you both scroll in the same bed and say nothing. Nothing is broken. This is the part nobody warns you about. The move from passionate love to companionate love, and it feels like betrayal when it's actually maturation, though that doesn't make the quiet any less disorienting. Passionate love is urgent and electric. It makes you hyper-aware of absence. Each text a small wound if it doesn't arrive fast enough. Companionate love is different. It's the nervous system settling. It's knowing someone so well that silence becomes restful instead of lonely. Your body stops flooding with dopamine just from seeing their name. Your nervous system stops treating them like they might disappear tomorrow. You both become ordinary to each other in the best way, which is exactly when some people panic. They confuse the absence of urgency with the absence of love. The spark faded, so something must be wrong. So they look outward. Someone new would bring back that feeling. Someone new would text at 2 a.m. again. But what they're chasing is the feeling of falling, not the feeling of having landed. The research is clear. Couples who weather this transition consciously report deeper satisfaction than those riding the high. It takes a different kind of attention. Less gazing, more seeing. Less urgency, more intention, less performance, more presence. If you're in that shift right now, the pull to run or the itch to fill the quiet with someone new is not a sign to leave. It's a sign to look directly at the person next to you and choose them again, not because passion demands it, but because you actually want to. The Four Horsemen of Decline. Watch what happens when a couple stops hearing each other. There's always a moment, maybe mid-conversation, maybe after weeks of strain, when the tone shifts. You're no longer disagreeing about a specific thing. You're being tried as a person. A researcher named John Gottman spent decades watching relationships fracture and found 4 patterns that predict collapse with eerie precision: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. They don't show up at the same time, and they don't arrive randomly. Contempt usually leads the charge. It's the eye roll. It's the sarcastic jab that carries a hidden message underneath. I don't respect who you are. That single shift from disagreement to disrespect changes everything in the nervous system. Once contempt settles in, criticism rushes in after. It's no longer about the specific frustration. It becomes, you're always like this. You never listen. This is fundamentally who you are. And then your partner's nervous system locks into fight mode. Defensiveness follows. Not apologizing, not curiosity, just pure defense. You explain away, you deflect, you counter-accuse. Neither of you can actually hear the other person anymore because you're both trying to survive. Then comes stonewalling, the final stage. Someone goes quiet, emotionally, maybe physically. The relationship doesn't crash at that point. It has already crashed. One person is simply checking out while still in the room. Here's what matters. These patterns aren't wired in. They're learned habits that build momentum, which means they can be interrupted. The real work happens the moment you feel contempt rising in your own chest, before it recruits the others into the spiral. That's when you have an actual choice. That's when you can pause and ask yourself what you really need to say instead of what you need to prove. The space between feeling the contempt and acting on it, that's where the relationship either survives or doesn't. Criticism versus complaint. You leave dishes in the sink again, and something shifts in how your partner says it. Not, I'm frustrated that dishes pile up and it makes me feel unsupported, but you always do this. You don't care. You're lazy. One lands like a complaint, specific, tied to behavior, solvable. The other lands like a character assassination. That's the difference, and it rewires how someone listens to you or stops listening altogether. A complaint points at what happened. Criticism points at who you are. When you say, you didn't call me back, that's a complaint. Your partner can do something with that. When you say, you're selfish and inconsiderate, you've already decided who they are, and now they're not thinking about calling you next time. They're thinking about defending themselves. The trap is that criticism feels true in the moment. You're hurt, you're angry, and the global statement matches the size of your feeling. But feelings are real, and facts are different. Your partner's lateness on one night does not make them an uncaring person. Their forgetfulness doesn't prove they don't love you. And here's what's brutal. Once you've flipped from complaint to criticism, you've handed your partner an impossible task. They can't become a better person in the next 10 seconds. They can only argue with you or shut down. Complaints invite repair. Criticism invites war. If you want someone to actually change something or to stay close to you through a rough moment, the move is staying specific. When you did X, I felt Y, and what I need is Z. That's not softness. It's the difference between being heard and being attacked. The person across from you will know whether you're describing their action or sentencing their soul. Contempt as relational poison. You know that feeling when someone you love says something that lands less like a disagreement and more like a statement about who you are. Not anger. Anger can be fixed, metabolized, argued through. This is colder. It's the eye roll tucked into a sentence. It's the laugh that says, you're ridiculous for even trying. It's the withering assessment disguised as a question. Gottman's research team called this contempt, and it's the single strongest predictor of divorce and relationship dissolution. Not fighting, not even infidelity, contempt. Because contempt is what happens when one person stops seeing the other as worth taking seriously. When contempt enters a room, it doesn't negotiate. It announces the contemptuous partner is no longer trying to understand. They're performing superiority, and they're doing it in a way that's designed to wound. They're not frustrated, they're disgusted. And the person on the receiving end of contempt doesn't just feel criticized, they feel erased. Over time, that erasure becomes the background radiation of the relationship. You stop defending yourself. You stop explaining. You stop trying because you've learned at a cellular level that it doesn't matter what you say. You've already been judged and found wanting. The trap is that contempt often disguises itself as honesty. I'm just being real. I'm just done pretending. I'm just calling it like I see it. But that's where it gets dangerous. The switch from "I hate what you did" to "I hate that you're you" is almost always contempt dressed up as clarity. And once that poison gets into the system, it spreads faster than either person expects. The person being contemned pulls away not because they stop loving, but because staying present feels like volunteering to be diminished. That's when the real leaving begins, quietly, in the space between one dismissal and the next. Defensiveness and blame. Deflection. There's a moment in almost every argument where someone gets quiet, their face tightens, and suddenly they're not talking about what they did. They're talking about what you did. You said something about their lateness, and now you're hearing about the time you forgot their birthday 3 years ago. It's not a counter-argument. It's a deflection, a reframing, a way of saying, without saying, "I'm not the problem here." Watch it happen, and you'll see how fast defensiveness turns a conversation into a courtroom. The other person isn't listening to your hurt anymore. They're building a case. When someone's in that mode, they're not trying to understand. They're trying to win, or more accurately, trying not to lose. Defensiveness shows up because vulnerability feels dangerous, like admitting one small mistake means you're fundamentally broken, that you'll be abandoned, that you're not worth loving as you are. So the mind does what it's trained to do. It protects. It finds reasons why the other person is wrong first. It catalogs their failures, their hypocrisies, their timing. Both sides feel trapped, but here's what actually kills a relationship. The people who pull away are often the ones who've learned that pointing out their own role only gets weaponized against them later. They watch defensiveness turn every honest conversation into a trial, so they stop trying. They stop bringing things up. Eventually, they stop hoping things will change. The real cost isn't the argument itself. It's the slow retreat that follows, the quiet decision that vulnerability isn't safe here. If you notice yourself deflecting, pause before you counter. Name what you actually heard them say, even if it hurts. That one move stops the spiral and lets the other person feel like there's actually a chance they're being seen, like this conversation might matter more than winning it. Negative sentiment override. There's a moment in many relationships where you stop filtering. Your partner brings you coffee in the morning, and instead of feeling loved, you think they're only doing this because they feel guilty. They laugh at your joke, and your brain whispers they're mocking me. A single neutral text, no emoji, no rush, becomes proof they don't care anymore. What changed isn't their behavior. What changed is you've entered a zone where your mind automatically translates everything they do through a lens of suspicion and hurt. Psychologists call this negative sentiment override, the tendency to interpret ambiguous or even positive actions from your partner through a filter of criticism and doubt. It's not paranoia, it's not stupidity. It's what happens when accumulated disappointment, unspoken resentment, or deep insecurity gets loud enough to drown out the actual content of what's happening. Your nervous system has decided, "I don't trust this person." And from that point forward, every action gets rewritten as evidence for that decision. A small kindness becomes calculation. A reasonable boundary becomes rejection. Silence becomes abandonment. The cruel part is that once this override activates, your partner feels it immediately. They sense that nothing they do will land right, so many begin to withdraw, not because they stopped caring, but because trying to prove their love to someone who's decided not to believe it becomes exhausting. And then you have what looks like them pulling away, when really it's a mutual retreat from a space where one person stopped translating generosity as love. If you recognize yourself here, the move isn't to demand better behavior from them. It's to pause and ask, what story am I laying on top of what they actually just did? That gap between the action and your reading of it, that's where the real work lives. The story we tell ourselves. You know that moment when your partner goes quiet and you immediately think they're mad at you, or they don't text back for 2 hours and suddenly you're convinced they're losing interest. That gap between what actually happened and what you're afraid it means is where the real damage lives. Your brain hates uncertainty, so it fills the silence with a story, and not just any story, usually the one that confirms your deepest fear. If you grew up feeling unseen, the delay becomes proof you're invisible again. If you learned early that people leave, a short fuse becomes the beginning of the end. The specifics change, but the mechanism is always the same. Your past becomes the narrator of your present. Here's what makes this so adhesive. Once the story starts, your brain searches for evidence to support it. Your partner mentions they're tired, and suddenly that's confirmation they're pulling away. They prioritize work, and that's the story playing out in real time. You start behaving as if the story is fact, withdrawing first, becoming defensive, testing them to see if they'll leave. And because humans tend to respond to the energy we give them, your partner actually does start pulling back, not because the original story was true, but because they feel the distance you created around it. The tragedy is that you just proved your own narrative right. The break in the cycle is small, but requires real attention. When that fear story starts, pause and ask what you actually know versus what you're assuming. Your partner's quiet might mean they're thinking about something at work, not that they've stopped caring. The gap you're filling is not evidence, it's a canvas, and you get to choose what you paint on it. Attribution error in conflict. Your partner cancels dinner last minute and your mind moves faster than thought. They don't care. They chose work over you. They are pulling away. You skip right past their boss, dropping something urgent or the fact that they are drowning in stress. You leap to motive, to character, to what it says about how they feel toward you. That gap, the speed at which you blame them for something while forgiving yourself for doing the exact same thing, that is attribution error, and it lives in the space between two separate inner worlds. When you forget plans, it was chaos and circumstance, memory buried under a dozen other things. When they forget, it was indifference. When you snap at them, you had a terrible day, work pressure, your own weight bleeding through. When they snap, they are angry at the relationship itself. You carry vastly more information about your own life. The invisible pressures, the thing that pulled your attention, the love underneath the mistake. You have almost none of that access to them, so you fill the absence with assumption, and because conflict amplifies everything, you fill it with the darkest shape available. Over months and years, you both accumulate these small verdicts about each other's character, stacking them like stones between you until the person you wake up next to starts to feel like a stranger. Not because they changed, but because you gave them a character they never actually earned. The real shift is quieter than you would expect. When they disappoint you, pause before the story hardens into stone. Ask what invisible context you are missing, not to excuse the behavior, but to stop building a villain out of someone who might just be human and overwhelmed. That tiny hesitation is often the difference between a conflict that passes and one that stays, collecting weight until the relationship buckles under it. Assuming malice over misunderstanding. Your partner forgets to text you back during their workday. Your mind goes quiet and sharp at the same time. They are punishing you. They are losing interest. They are showing you, once again, that you don't matter enough. The phone sits in your hand and you feel the proof of it settling into your chest, like something that was always true. But here's what's actually happening most of the time. They were in a meeting, or they got distracted, or their phone died, or they are tired in a way that has nothing to do with how they feel about you. We are wired to assume the worst interpretation first, especially when we are afraid of abandonment or when past relationships taught us that people leave quietly. Your brain is trying to protect you by assuming the threat is real and present. It's running an ancient algorithm that says, if you feel it coming, you can brace yourself before the blow lands. The problem is that this mind reading becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You withdraw because you assume withdrawal is coming. You get sharp and defensive because you are already fighting an imaginary betrayal. They feel the shift in you, the coldness, the distance, the sudden edge in your voice, and they don't know what they did wrong, so they pull back too, confused and hurt. The thing you feared most happens not because they decided to leave, but because you decided they already had. The move here is small but electric. When you feel that certainty about someone's motives rising up, pause. Ask them directly what's actually going on, instead of letting your fear narrate their story. Most of the time, they will look surprised, even sad, that you thought they meant harm. Most of the time, they didn't. The confirmation bias of doubt. Your partner says they love you, and your brain immediately starts collecting evidence that they don't. A text without an emoji. They scrolled past your story. They chose the show you didn't want to watch. Each small thing slots into a folder labeled proof, and the folder gets thicker every day, even as the actual evidence stays thin. This is confirmation bias wearing doubt like a costume. It feels less like a cognitive trick and more like the truth finally breaking through. Here's what makes it so sticky. Doubt is seductive. It promises clarity. If you can just prove the relationship is already over, you won't have to feel the vulnerability of hoping it works. Doubt is armor. So when you're looking for signs of distance, your brain doesn't just notice them, it manufactures them. The partner who was preoccupied at dinner? Pulling away. The quiet evening? Emotional shutdown. The same behavior that meant nothing 2 weeks ago now means everything, because now you're fishing for a particular story. The cruel part is that doubt actually creates the very distance you fear. You withdraw first as protection. You test them with silence, checking if they'll notice. You interpret their confusion as proof they never cared. And they, confused and hurt, start to pull back for real. The forecast became self-fulfilling. Breaking this requires the smallest intervention. Before you add another piece of evidence to the doubt folder, ask what the same behavior meant before the doubt started. That text without an emoji. Did it mean something different last month? Can you hold both possibilities at once? That your fear is real and that your interpretation might be editing the facts. That's not denial. It's simply giving the relationship the same fair interpretation you'd give a stranger. Selective memory of grievances. You know that fight from 3 months ago? The one where your partner said something that still stings when you think about it. Somehow, you remember the exact words, the tone, maybe even what you were wearing, but ask them about it now, and they'll genuinely have no idea what you're talking about. They remember a different version entirely. Softer, less intentional. Sometimes they barely remember it happened at all. This isn't dishonesty. This is how memory actually works when emotion is involved. Your brain doesn't record moments like a camera. It records them like a story you've rehearsed 1,000 times, and every rehearsal sharpens the painful parts while letting the context fade. You replay the wound because the wound matters to you. You return to that moment, add details your anxiety whispers, polish it with resentment until it becomes the clearest, most vivid thing in your shared history. Meanwhile, your partner genuinely doesn't carry it the same way. They moved through it, processed it differently, or their memory simply didn't attach the same emotional weight. And here's what makes relationships difficult. You're both right. Your memory of the grievance is real. Their forgetfulness is real. Neither of you is lying. But when you operate from the belief that they should remember it exactly as you do, that remembering would prove they understand how much they hurt you. You're asking them to inhabit your nervous system. You're asking them to validate a story that lives most vividly in your mind. The shift happens when you stop treating selective memory as betrayal and start treating it as evidence that you're each building different narratives from the same events. That's not necessarily a problem to solve. Sometimes it's just the human condition of two people loving each other from different angles. The recency effect on trust. Your partner had a rough week, snapped at you twice, forgot to check in once, seemed distant on the couch. Then Friday night they showed up with flowers and genuine attention, and suddenly the distance dissolved. You forgave without quite saying it out loud. And yet on Tuesday, when they were kind, you barely registered it. This is the recency effect at work in the place where trust lives. Your brain doesn't weight all moments equally. The most recent thing you experienced carries disproportionate gravitational pull, especially in relationships where you're already vulnerable. A harsh word yesterday outweighs 3 weeks of steadiness. A single cancellation rewrites your story about whether they really care. It's not rational, but it's how memory works. The latest data point becomes the lens through which you view everything else, and your nervous system treats it as the most accurate truth about who they are and how safe you are with them. The trap is that both of you are doing this simultaneously. They do something kind on Monday and feel good about the relationship. By Wednesday, your own coolness or distraction lands, and suddenly, from their perspective, you've become the unreliable one. Neither of you is lying. You're both just trapped by what happened last. Relationships need runway. They need proof built across time. But the recency effect compresses all that history into whatever happened most recently. When you're rebuilding trust after hurt, one moment of inconsistency can feel like it erases weeks of effort. So when you notice yourself spiraling after a single letdown, try naming it to them. I know Friday was good, and I'm still carrying Tuesday in my body. Let them know the old moments still matter, even when your mind wants to believe the new story. That naming often breaks the spell and reminds you both that trust isn't built in a single night. It's built in the 1,000 small moments you have to actively remember. Emotional bank account depletion. You show up late 3 times. You forget to ask how their day went. You scroll through your phone during dinner, then wonder why they seem distant. Here's what's actually happening. Every interaction is a deposit or a withdrawal, and you've been running a deficit so long you don't even notice the balance anymore. Think of it like a real account. If someone loves you, they start with goodwill, patience, the assumption that you're trying. That's the opening balance. But it doesn't stay full without maintenance. A small forgotten detail, minor withdrawal, a moment where you prioritize something else, or where you're present physically but gone mentally. Another one, a day when you're snappy because you're stressed and they take it personally. That adds up. The thing is, people can weather small withdrawals. Relationships have elasticity, but here's where people pull away. They don't usually leave after one large betrayal or argument. They leave after 1,000 tiny withdrawals they never named out loud. They get tired of being the only one making deposits, of asking, reaching, remembering while you drift through the relationship on autopilot. And the cruel part? By the time someone starts distancing themselves, they're often acting from a place where they've already mentally calculated that the account is empty. They're not being dramatic or punishing you. They're actually trying to protect what little they have left. They've stopped investing because they've stopped believing the investment will compound. The wake-up call is this: you don't fix depletion by having one grand gesture. You fix it by noticing the small daily deposits, the text that asks something real, the meal you're fully present for, the moment you put the phone down first. The emotional bank account doesn't forgive neglect, but it does respond to attention. Start there. Bids for connection ignored. Your partner mentions a feeling during dinner. Not a crisis, not a plea, just a small moment of vulnerability. You're tired. You nod. Reach for your phone. Ask them to remind you later. The words land, but your attention doesn't follow. What you've just done is refuse a bid for connection, and you probably didn't notice you were doing it. A bid is what researchers call any attempt, small or enormous, to be seen, heard, or held by someone. It can be as quiet as, "I had a rough day," or as direct as, "Can we talk?" Most of us think connection happens in the big gestures, anniversaries, declarations, serious conversations scheduled in advance. But the architecture of closeness is built on hundreds of tiny moments, and each ignored bid is a small brick removed from the foundation. Here's what gets dangerous. When bids go unanswered often enough, people stop making them, not because they stopped needing connection, because they learned it wasn't coming. They grow quieter. They turn their attention inward or outward, toward work, kids, hobbies, anything that stings less than asking and being met with silence or distraction. And the person doing the ignoring often doesn't realize what happened. They thought they were just busy. They don't see the retreat happening. By the time they notice the distance, the other person has already learned the lesson. This relationship is not a safe place to be vulnerable. The repair is smaller than you'd think. It isn't grand gestures or therapy breakthroughs. It's a pause when someone speaks. It's putting the phone down and turning your face toward theirs. It's saying, "I'm here," through presence, not just words. Every time you answer a bid, even the small ones, you're voting for closeness. And the person on the other side is feeling whether they matter enough to interrupt your morning. Turning toward or away. Your partner mentions something small, a frustration from their day, a thought they had, a worry about their body. In that split second, you choose. You can turn toward them, ask a follow-up question, hold eye contact, lean in physically or emotionally, or you can turn away, stay on your phone, give a one-word response, change the subject because it feels safer or easier. Gottman's research found that these micro moments of turning toward or away predict whether couples stay together or split. Not the big fights, not the dramatic betrayals. The tiny choice you make dozens of times a day determines the trajectory of the relationship itself. Turning toward is a practice of small yeses. Yes, I see you. Yes, your inner world matters. Yes, this is worth my attention right now. Turning away is not malice. It is often exhaustion, distraction, fear of intimacy, or a habit you learned before you even met this person. But here's what matters. Turning away compounds. One deflection feels small, but 10 in a row, 50 in a week, and your partner stops reaching. They stop trying. They harden. Not because you said anything cruel, but because the message accumulated. You are not worth turning toward. The flip is also true. If you start turning toward, really turning, not performing, something shifts in the other person. They soften. They risk more vulnerability. They believe again that you are there. This is not about forcing yourself to be endlessly present. It is about noticing where you habitually turn away and asking why. Fear? Resentment? Just tired? The pattern is usually the same each time. Once you see it, you can interrupt it. A real glance, a real question, a real pause. Strangers do not stay together. Couples who turn toward each other do. The micro-rejection accumulation. You suggest dinner at that new place on Friday. They say maybe. You text a funny video 3 days later. No laugh emoji back, just a thumbs up. You mention wanting to talk about next year's plans. They change the subject. None of these moments feels like abandonment. Each one is a hair's breadth, barely worth naming, but your nervous system is counting them anyway. And by the 15th small no, by the 100th half response, something has shifted. You are not angry at one thing. You are tired from 1,000 little withdrawals. This is how people pull away without ever saying saying goodbye. It does not happen in one cruel moment. It happens in the grain-by-grain erosion of small responses that feel just off enough to register as rejection, but too small to fight about. And here is the trap. The person pulling away often does not see it as a series of withdrawals. They were just tired that Friday, or they forgot to respond to that video, or they did not feel ready to talk. But intent does not matter. Your body learns the pattern. Each micro-rejection trains your system to brace. You stop reaching out. You start protecting. And because you are protecting, you withdraw first, preemptively, which they then interpret as coldness. Neither of you meant to start this. You just both got hit 100 times too lightly to name, and now you are both afraid. The path forward is not about fixing one big thing. It is about noticing the quiet drifting early, before it becomes the reason you stop trying at all. Ask, gently but directly, what is actually happening between us? Sometimes the answer will rescue things. Sometimes it will not, but at least you will know which one it is. Learned helplessness in love. There's a moment in most failing relationships where you stop trying, not because things got worse that day, but because you tried and nothing changed. So your nervous system learned a new rule. Your effort doesn't matter. A psychologist named Martin Seligman discovered this pattern in dogs. He'd expose them to unavoidable electric shocks, then later put them in a situation where they could easily escape. They didn't. They had learned the shocks were inescapable, so they just lay down. Humans do the same thing in love, except the shocks are rejection, dismissal, or the silent cold shoulder that greets every bid for connection. You reach out, they pull back. You share something vulnerable, they change the subject. You suggest a date night, they're too tired. After enough cycles, your brain decides, I don't actually control whether this person responds to me. I don't actually control whether I matter here. And that belief becomes the cage. The trap is that learned helplessness looks a lot like acceptance. You stop fighting and seem calmer, easier, less needy, but inside, you're not at peace. Just resigned. You've gone quiet, not because you healed, but because you surrendered. The person pulling away often mistakes that surrender for proof they were right to pull, creating a feedback loop that can run for years. The way out starts small. Notice the difference between learned helplessness and genuine choice. Are you not speaking up because it's truly not worth it, or because you've stopped believing your voice works? That distinction, tiny as it seems, is where agency lives. Rebuilding it means testing the old belief. Reaching out even when the pattern says don't. Setting a boundary even when you fear it won't stick. The belief that you're helpless only stays true if you never test it again. The self-fulfilling breakup prophecy. Your partner's quiet over coffee one morning and you don't ask what happened. Your brain writes a story instead. They're pulling away. This is it. The relationship is ending. And the moment that story lands, something shifts in how you move through the day. You text less. You don't reach for them the same way. You catch yourself cataloging every small incompatibility, every moment they didn't match your expectation, building evidence for a trial that hasn't happened yet. Here's where it gets dangerous. Your partner feels that shift. They don't know the story you told yourself. They only know you've become smaller, colder, less available. So they pull back too. Now you have proof. See? I was right. The relationship was dying, except it wasn't dying before you decided it was. This is not intuition finally validated. This is you building the very bridge you feared to cross, then walking it. You predicted abandonment and then abandoned first, dressed up as protection. Your partner didn't leave the relationship. You did, through 1,000 tiny withdrawals that looked like wisdom. Everyone does this at least once, especially after a hurt that stuck and built a catastrophe detector in your chest. The mechanism is almost mechanical. Fear triggers withdrawal. Withdrawal triggers reciprocal distance. Distance confirms the original fear. But here's the one move that breaks the cycle. When you feel that story crystallize, when you catch yourself collecting evidence of betrayal or distance, pause and ask if you've actually confirmed it with the person sitting next to you. Not accusatory, just curious. I noticed you've been quiet lately. Everything okay? Sometimes the answer will reshape everything. You'll hear about their own spiral, their own worry, their own story running parallel to yours, unfolding in the same room. And sometimes you'll realize the prophecy was never real until you spoke it into being. That small question, asked before the script finishes, is the difference between a relationship that dies and one that gets a second breath. Anticipatory withdrawal defense. You're sitting across from someone you care about, and somewhere in your chest, a quiet alarm goes off. Not because they've done anything wrong right now, but because you're already imagining them leaving. So, you leave first. You become less available, colder, more guarded. You pull away before they can. Your nervous system, primed by past abandonment or rejection, is trying to avoid the pain of being left by orchestrating the leaving itself. You get to control the story, own the exit, never sit in the terrible powerlessness of being chosen away from. The trap is that pulling away preemptively often creates exactly what you feared. Your person feels the distance, the guardedness, the withholding, and they respond by pulling back too. Then you interpret their withdrawal as proof that you were right all along, as if you'd glimpsed the future. You never get to know whether they actually would have stayed because you made it impossible for them to do so. This pattern gets especially sticky when things feel good. Happiness can trigger the defense in people with trauma histories because goodness feels unstable, unsustainable, like a setup for a much bigger fall. So they sabotage it gently, not with big dramatic fights, but with subtle unavailability, emotional flatness, distance that looks like it came from nowhere. If you recognize this in yourself, the move isn't to push through it or ignore the fear. Instead, name it out loud to someone you trust before the spiral tightens. Tell them you're scared of being left and that you might pull away as protection. Sometimes that one honest sentence, spoken before the pattern fully takes hold, can break the cycle before it feeds itself. You can't feel safe by controlling the ending. Safety comes from being seen in your fear and chosen anyway. That's the invitation underneath the defense. Preemptive abandonment. You know that feeling when you pull away before the other person gets the chance to? You stop texting, you get quieter in the room, you find reasons to cancel plans or keep things light. On the surface, it feels like protection, like you are taking control of a leaving that feels inevitable anyway. The logic is almost airtight. If I go first, it won't hurt as much. If I lower expectations, I won't be blindsided. But what you are actually doing is abandoning someone to avoid being abandoned, and the person on the other side usually has no idea why the temperature dropped. They feel rejected. They get confused. Sometimes they pull away too, which confirms your original fear. See, I knew they would leave, even though you are the one who started the retreat. Preemptive abandonment is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, written in distance and half-hearted replies. It often comes from old wounds, a parent who left, a partner who cheated, a friend who drifted. Your nervous system learned that closeness equals pain, so it sabotages connection before connection can hurt you. The trap is that it works the same way every time. You feel lonely. You keep people at arm's length. They sense the wall and stop trying. You feel abandoned. Your brain files it under proof and repeats the pattern with the next person. When you feel that urge to get quiet or create distance, try pausing before you act on it. Ask yourself, am I protecting myself or am I hurting someone who is still here? Sometimes that single question holds you steady enough for one more genuine conversation, one more day of real closeness. Not every person who gets close will leave. Some will actually stay if you let them. The porcupine dilemma. Two porcupines huddling for warmth on a freezing night. That's Schopenhauer's old metaphor, and it cuts deeper than you'd think. Get close enough to share body heat, and you both get pricked. Back away to stop the pain, and you're both freezing. The animal keeps moving, searching for the distance that hurts least. Sound familiar? That's what happens inside most relationships when the gap between intimacy and autonomy won't resolve. You want closeness? Your partner withdraws. So you pursue. They push harder. The quills come out because neither of you can find the right distance, and staying still feels impossible for both. What makes this so brutal is that pulling away isn't always coldness or rejection. It's often a desperate search for the temperature where the relationship doesn't feel like it's burning. Your partner might be fleeing not you, but the speed, the intensity, the feeling of being consumed. Maybe you're moving too fast toward vulnerability. Maybe they're terrified of losing themselves. Maybe you both are. The real fix isn't what most people think. You don't solve the porcupine dilemma by trying to become smoother or pretending the quills don't exist. You solve it by acknowledging that some prickling is normal and then deliberately choosing a distance, not in space, but in tempo. Slow down the big conversations. Leave room for them to breathe. Create safety not through fusion, but through rhythm, through knowing they can step back without you collapsing, and you can step back without them disappearing. The space between you isn't the enemy. What kills the relationship is the refusal to accept that space exists at all, and the panic that follows when your partner needs it. Emotional object constancy. Your partner goes quiet for a day. Not angry, not distant, just tired, absorbed in work. Your brain, though, does something strange. change. It decides they don't love you anymore. By evening, you've rewritten the entire relationship. They must be losing interest. The warmth from last week, you convince yourself it was never real. This is what happens when emotional object constancy breaks down. The ability to hold on to the feeling of being loved even when love isn't being actively performed right in front of you. Think of how a baby learns about objects. A toy disappears behind a blanket, and for months, the baby acts as though it no longer exists. When you pull it back out, surprise, it's still there. Eventually, the child understands. Things persist even when hidden. But for some of us, this never quite transfers to people. When a partner isn't mirroring affection in real time, isn't texting, isn't proving it, the feeling of their love vanishes. You become dependent on the constant performance of love to believe it exists. A neutral tone in a text, no good morning message, a rain check on plans. Each one collapses the certainty you built yesterday. What makes this treacherous in long-term relationships is that early love is loud and obvious. Constant touch, constant reassurance, constant proof. But real love quiets down. It becomes presence without fanfare, trust without verification. And if you lack object constancy, that quiet feels like abandonment. You'll pull away first, test them, demand reassurance, pick fights just to see them scramble. Anything to prove the feeling is still there. The cure isn't more promises from them. It's learning to sit with the feeling of being loved even when nobody's performing it. That's when pulling away stops. Splitting under stress. You know that moment when your partner does something small, forgets to text back, cancels plans, makes a joke that lands wrong, and suddenly they're not the person you love anymore. For a few hours or days, they become the villain. Not partly wrong, entirely wrong. That shift, where someone goes from good to all bad in your mind without any real middle ground, is called splitting, and stress is its engine. When you're depleted, threatened, or flooded with emotion, your brain actually struggles to hold complexity. The nuance that usually lets you think, I love them and they hurt me, or they're a good person who made a mistake. That nuance requires cognitive resources you don't have right now, so the mind takes a shortcut. They're good or they're bad. Your nervous system is in overdrive, your frontal lobe is offline, and suddenly the person you woke up next to is the problem, not just their behavior. This is why couples in real conflict often find themselves saying things like, "You've always been selfish," or "I don't even know who you are anymore." In those moments, they mean it. Their brain has genuinely reorganized the entire history and character of their partner into a single frame. It's not dishonesty, it's a stress response so automatic they can't see it happening. The trap is that the other person doesn't know they're dealing with a stressed version of you. They just hear themselves described as if they're irredeemable. They get defensive, split back, and suddenly you're locked in a fight where neither of you is actually fighting the person across from you. You're fighting the distorted version your frightened brains created. Before you blow up at them again, notice, am I seeing them or seeing my fear? That pause is everything. The all or nothing partner. You suggest a weekend trip and they light up, already sketching plans in their head. Then you mention you might not be able to go. Their whole face shifts, and suddenly it feels like you've destroyed something precious. Like half presence is the same as abandonment. This is how it works inside the all or nothing mind, a person for whom compromise reads as rejection, partial commitment as proof you don't really care. They've often built their whole self around being all in, the one who shows up completely, loves completely, sacrifices completely, and anything less triggers a terror that they are worthless, or that you've stopped valuing them. The weight of it is real. They may genuinely love you, but the love comes with an unspoken contract. You must match their intensity, or you're choosing against them. Cancel plans for work? You're prioritizing your career over them. Need time alone? You're pulling away. Want to keep friendships separate from couple time? You're building an escape route. What they can't see is that they're asking you to dissolve into them, and when you inevitably don't, because no human can sustain total fusion, they feel wounded, as if they've failed at love. Over time, you learn to hide your needs, perform total commitment, shrink yourself into their definition of devotion. Then they pull away anyway, convinced they gave everything and got nothing back. The real trap is theirs. The more they demand totality, the more you withdraw from the pressure. The more you withdraw, the more they panic and tighten their grip. The only way out asks something they may not be ready for. Learning that your partial presence is still presence, that your separate self actually deepens your capacity to love, not diminishes it. But you can't teach them that. You can only stop performing the fantasy of total merger and let them feel what it costs to lose someone by refusing to let them be whole. Shame and the hiding impulse. You do something small that doesn't align with who you want to be. Miss a commitment, get snappy over nothing, fail at something that mattered, And suddenly, the weight shifts. Your chest gets tight. You want to disappear, not into sadness, but into invisibility. That urge to vanish, to pull the blinds closed and stay quiet until it passes, is shame speaking. And here's what makes it dangerous in relationships. Shame doesn't whisper that you made a mistake. It tells you that you are the mistake. The difference matters enormously. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And if anyone sees what I really am, they'll leave. So when you're ashamed, you hide. Not just from your partner, from yourself. You stop answering texts. You keep conversations surface. You become smaller, safer, less visible. You might blame your partner for the distance, tell yourself they don't understand you, when really, you're protecting them from the person you believe you are. And your partner feels the wall go up. They don't know about the shame. They just know you're gone. They might try harder to reach you, or they might pull back themselves, assuming rejection. Neither of you knows that the real barrier isn't disagreement or incompatibility. It's your own belief that you don't deserve to be known. The strange mercy is that shame thrives in silence. It grows in the dark space between what happened and who you think you must be. One small act of telling someone, not confessing catastrophically, just being honest, can crack it open. Not to be forgiven, but to be seen anyway. That's what undoes the hiding impulse, the quiet proof that you can be flawed and still belong. Vulnerability as perceived weakness. You tell someone you are struggling and you watch their face shift. Just a small tightening around the eyes, a pause that lasts half a second too long. In that moment, you have already rewritten the story. You are no longer the competent person they knew. You are the one who falls apart, the one with cracks. So you pull back, not because they rejected you, but because you rejected yourself first. This is the real machinery behind vulnerability as weakness. Not what others think, but what you believe their silence means. Most people were never taught the difference between admitting you are human and admitting you are broken. When you say, I am scared, or I do not know what to do, your nervous system hears danger. It translates the truth into a liability. In relationships, this becomes catastrophic because the people who love you are waiting for exactly this moment, when you stop performing and start being real. But if you have spent years learning that softness is dangerous, that honesty costs you status, that need is shameful, then the people closest to you will feel you locking them out just as they are moving closer. You become a wall they cannot reach. Here is what nobody tells you. Strength and vulnerability are not opposites. The strongest people you will ever meet are usually the ones who can sit with uncertainty without pretending it away. What looks like weakness from the outside, admitting you were wrong, asking for help, sitting with discomfort, is actually the architecture of trust itself, the architecture of real intimacy. The next time you feel that old reflex to hide, to perform, to shrink back into certainty, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting them, or am I protecting the lie that protection is the same as love? Because those are two very different things. The armored heart response. You've probably noticed it in yourself. The moment someone gets close enough to hurt you, something shifts. Your chest tightens, your words become measured. Affection starts to feel like a risk you can't afford, so you pull back just enough to make sure they can't get all the way in. That preemptive coldness, that armor you slip on before anyone has a chance to wound you, that's the armored heart response. And it feels like wisdom, but it's actually fear, dressed up in control. The mechanism is simple. If you don't let yourself need them, they can't leave you devastated. If you stay a little distant, a little guarded, you maintain the illusion that you're the one deciding the terms of the closeness. The problem is that armor doesn't just block pain, it blocks everything. Your partner reaches for your hand, and you feel it as a demand. They express vulnerability, and you feel unsafe, like their need is too much, like they're asking you to carry something impossible. What you are actually sensing is your own fear of being trapped, of mattering too much, of what it would mean if this person mattered to you as much as they actually do. Over months or years, that armor gets heavier and thicker. They stop reaching, they stop asking, and you get what you engineered, distance. But it doesn't feel like safety anymore. It feels like loneliness dressed up as independence. The quiet work is learning to notice when you're armoring, that small moment of tightening before the withdrawal kicks in, and asking yourself what you're protecting against that's actually in the room right now versus what you're still guarding against from somewhere else. Most times, they're not the threat you learned to fear. Defensive detachment. You say something that lands wrong and they don't get angry. They just fold inward. Suddenly, they're texting less, keeping conversations surface level, finding reasons to be busy. It feels like punishment, but it doesn't feel deliberate. What you're watching is defensive detachment, and it's how people protect themselves without consciously knowing that's what they're doing. When someone feels hurt or criticized or exposed, retreat often feels safer than fighting back. Pulling away creates distance, literal space between them and the thing that stung. They can't be rejected further if they've already left. They can't be wounded again if there's nothing vulnerable left on the table. The brain interprets emotional pain as a genuine threat, and the nervous system's job is to neutralize threats. Detachment is the slow burn version of fight or flight, the way the body says, stay back without using words. You might notice it as quietness, as suddenly being put last on their priority list, as them being too tired more often. Sometimes they'll frame it as practical. They're busy at work. They need space. They're focusing on themselves. Maybe that's partially true, but underneath, there's usually a wound they're protecting, something that felt too tender to leave exposed. The really tricky part is that defensive detachment often pushes away the very person who could help heal it, because you're left alone, confused, trying harder, and they're pulling further back in response to your effort. Neither of you is doing anything wrong. You're both running protective programs. Breaking that loop means one person has to recognize what's actually happening and name it gently, without blame. I notice you've been distant. I don't want that distance between us. What do you need? That kind of direct, soft invitation can sometimes dissolve the walls faster than anything else, because it tells them something they need to hear. I see what you're doing, and I'm not leaving anyway. Emotional numbing as survival. You know that feeling when you've been crying so hard that suddenly nothing comes out anymore? Not because you're okay, because your system has shut the gates. Your partner might be sitting right there, saying something that should wreck you, and you feel almost nothing. Cold, flat, like you're watching your own life through frosted glass. That's not indifference. That's your nervous system doing what it was designed to do, protecting you from overwhelm by turning down the volume on everything. Joy, pain, longing, fear, the whole orchestra. When we experience too much too fast, or when we've been hurt repeatedly in the same way, our body learns that feeling things deeply is dangerous. It learned that the only way to survive is to not feel at all. And here's the part that ruins relationships. The person pulling away isn't deciding to leave you. They're deciding that numbness is safer than the risk of getting hurt again. They're dissociating, yes, but it's not laziness or coldness. It's a desperate, protective act. The trap is that this survival response becomes its own prison. Someone can be physically present and emotionally miles away, not because they don't love you, but because loving you right now feels like standing in traffic. Their nervous system has decided connection equals danger. When you see someone going numb in front of you, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the intensity of what they're feeling about the situation, about themselves, about the risk of being broken again. The smallest move toward them right now is to create safety, fewer demands, quieter presence, patience with their flatness, space to simply exist, because numbing is a symptom of terror, not a choice. And people don't choose their way out of terror. They only emerge when the environment stops confirming that the world is unsafe. The gray rock reflex. You've probably felt it. Someone shares something with you, a hurt, a frustration, a moment they needed witnessed, and instead of opening, something in you goes flat. Not cold exactly, just unavailable, neutral, like you've turned into beige wallpaper. And what's strange is how quickly your partner notices. They came in looking for a spark and found a stone, so they pull away, assuming you don't care, when really you were just protecting yourself from getting drawn into their intensity. This is the gray rock reflex, and it happens to almost everyone in a relationship, especially when we're tired, flooded, or scared of where a conversation might go. The reflex works like this. When your nervous system senses threat, even a soft, emotional kind of threat, it has 3 doors: fight, flight, or freeze. Gray rock is a freeze response dressed up as presence. You are physically there, maybe even nodding, but your emotional availability has stepped out. No color, no reaction, no fuel for the fire. The problem is that your partner's nervous system reads this as abandonment before your mind even registers it as self-protection. They came vulnerable and met a wall. Over time, they stop trying. They learn that opening with you leads nowhere, so they turn inward or outward, to friends, to fantasy, to distance. The stickiness here is that gray rock feels safe to you in the moment, but it erodes trust faster than conflict does. Conflict at least says, I'm here and fighting. Gray rock says nothing. If you find yourself slipping into it, notice it without shame. but break it fast. Even, "I'm flooded right now and I need 10 minutes" is infinitely better than stone silence. Your partner needs to know you're still in the room. Silent treatment as punishment. You know that moment when someone stops talking to you and the whole house shifts, not because they've said anything cruel, but because they've gone completely silent. Suddenly you're in a courtroom you didn't know existed, decoding the absence of words, wondering what you did, when it will end, whether you should apologize for something you didn't even know was wrong. That's the silent treatment, and it works on something far deeper than argument ever could. Silence doesn't defend itself. It doesn't give you a chance to respond or repair. Instead, it hangs there, heavy and intentional, and your nervous system knows, really knows, that you're being punished. The person wielding it controls everything because they alone know when it lifts. You're left performing apologies, gestures, kindnesses, all while waiting for the one thing that would tell you it's okay. Acknowledgement. What makes it so corrosive is that the silent treatment is punishment disguised as distance. It says, "I'm hurt," without giving you the actual words to hear the hurt. It says, "You did something wrong," without telling you what. Over time, the person on the receiving end stops trying to understand and just tries to survive. They become hypervigilant to mood shifts, walking on eggshells, managing someone else's emotions instead of being guided by their own. The relationship stops being about connection and becomes about appeasement. If you catch yourself reaching for silence, pause first. The impulse almost always comes from feeling unheard or deeply hurt. So name that instead. Say it out loud. Let your partner into the actual problem rather than leaving them locked outside guessing. And if you're on the receiving end, you don't have to sit in indefinite silence. You can say, "I want to understand what happened. I'm ready to listen when you are." That simple move puts you back on the same side instead of across from each other. Weaponized withdrawal. You know that feeling when someone stops texting back, not because they're busy, but because they know it will hurt you? That's the moment withdrawal stops being a defense and becomes a tool. Most people don't notice the shift because it happens so gradually, so reasonably. First, they pull back because they need space, which feels fair. Then they notice you getting anxious, reaching out more, trying harder to reconnect. And here's where the power dynamic tips. Some people realize their absence has become the thing you're most afraid of, so they use it. They pull away not to heal, but to punish, to control, to make sure you never forget they can leave. The silence becomes a statement. The unavailability becomes proof of how much you need them. What makes this so corrosive is that it wears the mask of self-protection. They'll tell themselves, and you, they're just protecting their energy, setting boundaries, being honest about what they need. Maybe that starts as true, but somewhere along the way, the withdrawal becomes the relationship itself. They measure their power by your panic. They feel safe only when you feel uncertain. Because withdrawal is so hard to call out without sounding needy or demanding, you end up begging someone to stop hurting you by doing what they frame as simply taking care of themselves. The escape hatch is recognizing when your nervous system is being used as a hostage. If someone's withdrawal only intensifies when you're closest, if the space they need grows bigger every time you meet them halfway, if the punishment fits the crime of loving them too openly, that's not protection anymore. That's a relationship where someone has learned your fear is more reliable than your affection, and that's worth naming, even if it costs you the connection you were fighting to save. The abandonment engulfment seesaw. Sit in that car with them for a moment. One person has gone very still, almost unreachable. They've pulled back hard, needing space, afraid of being swallowed whole by someone else's hunger for closeness. The other is leaning in, voice rising, desperate to close the distance, terrified of being abandoned if this rift widens one more inch. Neither of them chose this rhythm. Both are running from the same fear, just in opposite directions, and they have no idea they're dancing the same song. This is the seesaw, and it runs on a simple, brutal logic. When one person feels engulfed, they pull away to survive. When the other feels that distance open up, panic kicks in. They pursue. The pursuer's push triggers the withdrawal. The withdrawer's walls trigger the chase. Two people, two survival instincts, one system spinning tighter with every move. What makes it invisible is that both feel like the victim. The one pulling back feels invaded, trapped, suffocated. Their freedom is at stake. The one pursuing feels erased, unseen, abandoned. Their connection is at stake. So each one doubles down on their move, swearing they're just protecting themselves. But here's what actually stops it. One person has to feel safe enough to step off the seesaw entirely, not in pursuit mode, not in retreat, just present, anchored, undefended. It usually has to be whoever isn't drowning in fear that moment. silent, the one with capacity left to spare. That person can pause their usual pattern, name what's happening without blame, and offer something radical. A hand that doesn't grip, a door that stays open, a voice that says, "I see you running, and I'm not chasing." The seesaw doesn't break because love wins. It breaks because someone has the clarity and courage to step off first. When one person finally stops the dance, the other often stops too, not because they're forced, but because the threat they were protecting against has vanished. Fear of being truly seen. There's a moment in almost every relationship where you're sitting across from someone and you realize they're about to ask you something real, something that would require you to show them a version of yourself you've carefully kept private. And in that split second, the urge to leave becomes almost physical, not because you don't trust them, not because the relationship is bad, but because being fully known by another person is terrifying in a way that's hard to name. You've spent so long managing how people see you, curating, hiding, moderating, that the thought of being witnessed in your entirety feels like exposure. What if they see the things you've been protecting them from? The selfishness, the envy, the small cruelties you've thought about committing, the parts of you that are messy, ordinary, or worse, disappointing. So you pull back. You keep conversations light. You stay just close enough to feel safe, but far enough away that they can't really see you. And here's the trap. The more you hide, the lonelier you become, because the person loving you is loving a version of you, not you. Some people spend years in relationships this way, mystified by why intimacy never seems to deepen, never realizing they've made themselves invisible on purpose. The pulling away isn't about losing interest in the other person. It's about protecting yourself from the vulnerability of being known. But there's something worth sitting with here. The people worth keeping are almost always the ones who can handle seeing you. The real work isn't becoming more hidden. It's slowly, carefully letting someone look, and that terrifies us most of all because it means they might stay anyway, which means we can't blame the distance on them anymore. Imposter feelings in intimacy. You're lying next to someone who loves you, and your stomach tightens with a thought that doesn't quite fit. They don't actually know me. Not really. And if they did, they'd leave. That whisper is the imposter feeling in intimacy. The quiet terror that the version of you someone fell for is a rehearsed thing, not the real thing, and that real thing is somehow defective. It arrives most when you're closest, most visible, most at risk of being seen through. Here's where it gets sticky. This feeling often has nothing to do with who your partner actually thinks you are. It lives in the gap between your secret self story and the person they're looking at. They see someone worthy of love. You're running an internal audit of all the ways you're not, all the parts you're hiding, all the times you performed a better version, and now you're trapped maintaining it. The exhaustion is real, and the cruel part is that intimacy, the very thing that should dissolve this, can amplify it instead, because now the stakes are higher. Now they know your rhythms, your wounds, your patterns. Your brain catches every moment you feel awkward, every joke that landed flat, every time you couldn't keep the facade perfectly smooth, and files it as evidence. Eventually, they'll compile it all and realize you were never who they thought. What actually helps is small and counterintuitive. Stop trying to prove the imposter wrong. Instead, let your partner see the versions you're afraid of. Not all at once, but incrementally. The repair happens not through perfect transparency, but through the repeated experience of being known and still chosen. Each time they see a crack and don't leave, that false equation your mind has been holding, visibility equals rejection, starts to crack too. The unworthiness core belief. There's a moment in most relationships where someone does something small, forgets to text back, chooses time with friends, mentions an ex, and you feel it hit differently than it should. Not annoyance, not disappointment. A door slamming shut inside you that whispers, they would do this to you because you deserve it. That feeling, that swift translation of ordinary human behavior into evidence against yourself, that's where the unworthiness core belief lives. It's not a conscious thought you woke up one day deciding to believe. It's older than that. It came from a parent who loved you but withheld warmth unless you performed, or from a childhood where you learned early that other people's needs mattered more than your own, or from years of being told, in words or in silence, that you were too much or not enough. And now it's a lens. When someone pulls away, you don't think they're stressed or overwhelmed or protecting their own heart. You think you finally confirmed what you already knew. This belief is insidious because it has a gravity all its own. It pulls everything toward it. A raised voice becomes rejection. A boundary becomes proof. A partner's need for space becomes kindling. And the cruelest part is what it makes you do. You stop asking, stop leaning, Stop letting them see you struggle, because asking feels like begging someone to stay with someone unworthy. You preemptively abandon yourself to spare them the burden of you. If this lives in you, the antidote isn't affirmations or false confidence. It's actually looking back at the evidence you've collected and asking yourself whether the people who loved you, who stayed, did so because you earned it by shrinking, or because something in you was worth staying for, even when you were fully present and messy and real. Self-sabotage before rejection. You've felt it before. That moment when things are actually good and something in you moves to wreck it. Not consciously. You don't wake up thinking, today I'll sabotage my happiness. Instead, you pick a fight over nothing. You get distant. You test them, push them, find reasons why it won't work. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos you create, you feel a strange relief. Because now, the ending makes sense. Now you were right all along. They were going to leave anyway. This is self-sabotage, and it's less about wanting to fail and more about controlling the narrative of failure. If you end it first, or if you make it end, the rejection doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your plan. There's a twisted safety in that. Humans will often choose a painful story they authored over an uncertain one they don't control. The brain would rather be right about disaster than surprised by it. What makes this particularly quiet is that you might not even notice you're doing it. You'll feel justified. You'll remember only the things that hurt, the small moments that confirmed your fear, the way they said something that proved they didn't really care. Your mind will edit the real. You'll cut out the good parts, keep the sharp parts, and build a case against your own happiness. The way out isn't to force yourself to stay or to white-knuckle through the fear. It's to notice when you're reaching for the sabotage, when you feel the urge to create distance, to pick the fight, to find the proof. Pause there, not to stop it, but to ask what you're protecting yourself from. That small moment of awareness, that tiny question before you act, often breaks the pattern before it hardens into your story again. Testing the relationship compulsively. You've probably noticed it happening without even naming it. That small voice that says, what if I text them something a little darker than I normally would just to see if they stick around? Or you go a day without reaching out, silently keeping score to measure if they miss you first. You might pick a fight over something small just to watch whether they'll work to fix it, or withdraw affection to see if they notice the gap. It feels like you're running an experiment, and in some ways, you are. These compulsive tests are born from real fear. Fear of abandonment, fear that you're not actually wanted, fear that the connection is shakier than it looks. So your nervous system keeps testing, hunting for evidence, running the same painful probe over and over. The trap is that testing doesn't feel like testing to the other person. It feels like instability, like you don't trust them, which then makes them pull back for real, which confirms your fear, which triggers more tests. You've accidentally built a machine that manufactures the abandonment you were so afraid of in the first place. The person doesn't leave because the relationship was weak. They leave because being tested constantly is exhausting and erodes safety faster than almost anything else. If you find yourself in that loop, the move is to name it while it's happening. I'm about to test this connection. Not out loud necessarily, but to yourself. Just that tiny moment of recognition can interrupt the compulsion enough to ask a different question. What would it mean if I didn't test? What if I just trusted the ordinary day? That pause, small as it is, can be enough to break the cycle before it breaks the person standing in front of you. The reassurance-seeking trap. You text them something small, a joke, a thought, a check-in, and then you wait. Nothing lands the way you want, so you text again. Or you bring it up in person, softer this time, asking in a roundabout way whether they still care. And in that moment, something shifts. They feel the weight. They answer, but something in the answer feels thin, obligated, like they are giving you what you asked for rather than what they actually feel. That distinction is the whole thing. When you hunt for reassurance, you are not looking for information anymore. You are looking for your nervous system to relax. But reassurance from someone else can never be the antidote to doubt that lives inside you. It works once, maybe twice, but then the doubt comes back, and you need another hit, and another. The person on the other end starts to feel like they cannot win. Whatever they say will not be enough, because the problem is not their words. The problem is your relationship with uncertainty itself. And here is the trap. The more you ask, the more distant they often become. Not because they stopped caring, but because repeated reassurance seeking, especially when it feels frantic, registers to them as a leak in the boat. Your doubt becomes their responsibility to plug. Eventually, most people pull back. They get quieter. They become less generous with their warmth. And you interpret that retreat as confirmation that something is actually wrong, when really you are watching them protect themselves from exhaustion. The way out is not to fight the urge to ask. Notice the moment it arrives. Sit with it. Breathe. Ask yourself what you actually need right now. Is it certainty, or is it to feel grounded? Usually it is the second thing, and that is something you can give yourself. Anxiety amplified by silence. You send a text to someone you care about. 3 minutes pass. 10. 30. Your chest tightens. You wonder if you said the wrong thing, if they are angry, if the relationship just shifted. But here is what is actually happening. Your nervous system has moved into high alert, and the silence is not neutral anymore. It is a screen, and your anxiety is the projector. Your mind fills every gap with a story. They hate what you said. They are done. You messed up, and each version feels more real the longer the silence stretches. The cruel part is that anxiety does not whisper possibilities. It insists on the worst one. You do not think, maybe they are busy. You think, this is over, and your body responds as if it is fact. Your heart rate climbs, your shoulders tense. You begin to plan your own withdrawal, sending fewer messages, bracing yourself, already practicing the breakup conversation in your head, all before they have even replied. And when they finally do text back with something totally normal, a part of you is almost disappointed because it means you spent 30 minutes suffering over nothing, but that nothing was not empty. Silence, for an anxious person, is an active space. It is where worst-case scenarios live and breed. The trick is not to convince yourself they are busy or that it will be fine. That rarely works anyway. It is to notice the exact moment your mind starts projecting, to feel the tightness spreading across your chest and shoulders, and to separate the story from the screen underneath it. When you can do that, when you can sit with the discomfort without narrating it into catastrophe, the silence stops being a threat and just becomes what it always was. Waiting. The interpretation gap. You say something casual, your partner hears criticism. You make a plan for the weekend. They feel controlled. You stay quiet during dinner because you're tired. They think you're angry with them. None of these gaps are accidents. They're not miscommunications that better words alone can fix. They're interpretations, and they live in the space between what actually happened and what each person decided it meant. Here's what makes it dangerous. Once your partner interprets something a certain way, that interpretation becomes their reality. They don't go back and re-examine it. They file it under proof. Proof you don't care. Proof you're distant. Proof you're pulling away. And the longer they hold that interpretation, the more evidence they find to support it. Your neutral face becomes coldness. Your boundary becomes rejection. Your need for space becomes the beginning of the end. The trap deepens because you're not even arguing about the same event anymore. You're arguing about two completely different movies playing in two heads. You think you're defending yourself against a charge. They think you're confirming what they already know. The way out isn't more explaining. When someone's interpretation is locked in, another explanation usually just looks like denial or evasion. What actually works is recognizing the gap exists before it hardens into belief. If you notice your partner interpreting something about you harshly, you can pause and ask, not defensively, but genuinely curious, what did that look like to you? Not to convince them they're wrong, but to understand where the interpretation came from. Sometimes just naming the gap together, watching it together, is enough to soften it. The goal isn't to be perfectly understood. It's to keep the interpretation from becoming a story carved in stone before the real damage starts. Mind-reading expectations. You're sitting across from someone you care about, and they haven't asked how your day was. Your chest tightens. The story that runs underneath is automatic. They don't actually care. They're distant. They're pulling away. What you don't say is the invisible rule you're enforcing, that a caring person would sense your mood the moment you walked in, would know you needed to talk without you having to hint, would ask before you even realized you needed it. And now you're hurt, and they have no idea why. This is the trap of mind-reading expectations, the belief that love means knowing what someone needs without them saying it, that silence or routine equals indifference, that the people closest to you should just understand. The weight of this assumption is crushing because it puts everyone you love in an impossible position. They're supposed to be psychic. They're supposed to catch every shift in your energy, decode every sigh, predict what you need before you know it yourself. And when they inevitably fail, because they're human, you feel unseen, uncared for. It becomes proof the relationship is dying. But here's what actually happens. They simply didn't know. Your partner isn't distant because they don't love you. They didn't ask about your day because they were tired, distracted, or operating under their own invisible rules about conversations. When you treat assumed needs as proven facts, you're building resentment on a foundation of guesses. The shift that matters is small and brutal. Tell them, not with anger or the weight of a secret test. Just say what you need, what you felt, what you were hoping for. Watch what happens when you stop expecting them to read your mind and start letting them actually know you. The relief for both of you arrives immediately. Unspoken contract violations. You said you'd call more often. Not explicitly, never in those words, but the rhythm was clear. Sunday mornings, brief check-ins on Wednesday, a voice crack when you miss someone. Then one week, the rhythm broke. No call. The next week, silence again. And suddenly, your partner is reading that silence as a betrayal, even though nothing was ever formally promised. This is the architecture of most relationship fractures. Not broken agreements, but violated expectations that were never actually stated out loud. Every relationship runs on invisible contracts. You show up when things are hard. You notice when something is wrong. You remember the small things that matter. You prioritize this person above the noise. You maintain a certain level of curiosity, effort, affection. None of these are usually negotiated. They're absorbed from previous relationships, from what you watched your parents do, from the feeling of being loved once and deciding that's the baseline forever. So when your partner pulls back, gets quieter, stops initiating, becomes less interested in the small rituals, they're not just changing behavior. They're violating the contract you never knew existed. The cruelest part is this. Most people don't pull away to hurt you. They pull away because they feel the contract was already broken. Maybe you forgot something. Maybe you changed. Maybe they grew, and the old expectations no longer fit who they are now. But because the contracts were never spoken, you're both convinced the other person is wrong. You're both right, and you're both invisible to each other. So before you interpret distance as rejection, ask yourself, what did I expect without saying it? And what might they have needed that I never heard? That conversation, the unspoken one finally made visible, is often where people stop pulling away. The resentment iceberg. Resentment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as anger that you can see and name and argue about in a single night. Instead, it builds in the basement of your chest, one small betrayal stacked on top of another, each one so minor that pointing it out makes you look petty. You wash the dishes again, third time this week, and it's not the dishes. Your partner forgets to ask how your day went, and it's not that question. It's the pattern of not being curious about your life. They make a joke at your expense in front of friends, laugh it off, expect you to laugh too. You do, but something hardens, and then it hardens again. What sits above the water, the fight that finally erupts, is never the real issue. You're not actually furious about dishes or forgotten questions or one cruel joke. You're furious because you've been silently translating these moments into a story. I don't matter here. I am not being chosen. Resentment is what happens when you've been telling yourself that story so long, it feels like absolute truth. By the time you blow, your partner has no idea why you're so angry. They saw dishes, a forgetful day, a harmless joke. They didn't see you collecting evidence, brick by brick, that you were being taken for granted. The real trap is waiting until the iceberg is mostly underwater to finally speak. By then, the words come loaded with all that accumulated weight, and your partner hears an attack instead of a plea. The move, if you're catching this pattern in yourself, is smaller and more honest. Name the small thing while it's still small. Not to punish or keep score, but to keep the relationship awake. Resentment thrives in silence. Say it now. Emotional starvation and drift. You know that feeling when someone you love stops asking about your day? Not in a cruel way. They just kind of assume they already know you. They respond to what you say, but they don't lean in anymore. They don't wonder. A month passes, then 3, and you realize you can't remember the last time they asked you something that made you stop and really think about how to answer. That's not the beginning of drift. That's the middle, when the starvation has already set in. Emotional starvation happens quietly, almost like dehydration. You don't notice it until your mouth is dry. It's when the small questions stop, when curiosity dies, when someone settles into knowing you instead of wanting to know you. And here's what makes it so corrosive. You don't pull away because the person hurt you. You pull away because they stopped feeding something essential. You become a comfortable habit instead of a mystery. And habits are easy to neglect. The person on the other side of that equation often doesn't see it coming. They think everything is fine because nothing dramatic happened. But fine and nourished are not the same thing. Fine is what happens when you stop expecting anything. The dangerous part? By the time someone tells you they feel unseen, they've usually already made the decision to leave. They've been rehearsing the goodbye in small ways for months. They've learned to need you less. So the antidote is not grand gestures or apologies after the fact. It's the simple, stubborn practice of staying curious about someone even after you think you figured them out. Ask the question you think you know the answer to anyway. Notice what changed in their voice since last month. Remember that knowing someone is never actually finished. The slow fade phenomenon. You notice your friend doesn't text back for 3 days instead of 3 hours. They still like your posts, but they stop calling. Lunch plans get postponed, then quietly forgotten. Nobody had a fight. Nobody said goodbye. The relationship just thins. This is the slow fade, and it's how most people quietly leave each other's lives. So gradual that neither person can point to a moment when things actually shifted. What makes it psychological is how the fader often doesn't do it on purpose. You're not sitting down plotting an escape. Instead, life gets busier, or the person says something that lands wrong, or the friendship stops feeling effortless and you just show up less. Each cancellation feels reasonable on its own. Each delayed text feels justified, but strung together, they're a slow retraction. And here's where it cuts. The person being faded feels it before it's real. They notice the gaps. They try harder, the extra text, the initiative to plan, which only makes the whole thing sadder because the fader is now also dealing with guilt, which makes them pull back even more. It becomes a spiral where both people are reacting to their own discomfort instead of naming what's happening. The slow fade works because it avoids confrontation, but that same avoidance is also what makes it so disorienting. You're left interpreting silence, wondering if you did something wrong or if this was just natural drift. The antidote, rough as it sounds, is the willingness to say it aloud. If you feel the fade starting, either as the one fading or the one faded, a single honest sentence can break the spell. Things feel different between us. That's not dramatic. It's just real, and it gives both people a choice about what happens next, instead of leaving them both guessing in the quiet. Rebuilding safety after distance. The gap between you has stopped growing, but neither of you knows how to cross it anymore. Words feel stiff. Touch feels risky. You are both waiting for the other person to prove it is safe to move closer. And that standoff can hold longer than the distance itself ever did. Rebuilding safety is not about grand gestures or perfect apologies. It is about showing up small, consistently, and without expectation of immediate payoff. It looks like texting back within an hour, not because you have to, but because you want them to know you are thinking about them. It looks like asking how their morning was and actually listening to the answer, even though the conversation used to be automatic. It looks like admitting when you are defensive instead of pretending the walls never went up. The nervous system learns safety through repetition, not promises. Your body needs to feel the pattern. This person shows up, they do what they say, they do not punish you for your own fear. That takes weeks, sometimes months. Do not rush it or measure it in days. The worst trap after distance is trying to fast forward back to intimacy, as if enough good moments will erase what happened. They won't, but small moments, stacked over time, can rewire what your body expects from them. Start by being the person who breaks the stalemate first, the one who initiates gently, who stays curious instead of guarded, who is willing to be vulnerable before you have proof it is safe. You cannot control whether they meet you halfway, but you can control whether you show them what safety actually looks like. That is the only map that leads anywhere, and it is built one small, unremarkable moment at a time. The pull-away instinct explained. You reach out. They take longer to text back. You ask about their day and the answer gets shorter. You suggest plans and suddenly they're busy. It happens so slowly you almost miss it, or you see it all at once like a door closing. That feeling of someone slipping away is not random noise in a relationship. It's a pattern with roots, and it almost always makes sense to someone, even if it doesn't make sense to you. The pull-away is not an accident or a sign they stopped caring. It's usually a response to overwhelm, to feeling misunderstood, to moving too fast, to needing space to breathe, or sometimes to old wounds that have nothing to do with you at all. Your first job in this conversation is to understand what pulls people away so you stop taking it personally and start seeing what's actually happening underneath. Here's what matters. The pull-away instinct is self-protective, not cruel. When someone feels crowded, their nervous system activates a quiet defense. Distance. When they feel judged, they withdraw. When they sense you need them to be someone they're not, they pull inward. And when past abandonment or rejection lives in their body, even closeness can trigger a retreat. None of that means you did something wrong. It means they are reacting to their own internal weather, their own history, their own capacity in this moment. Understanding this stops the spiral where you chase and they run further, the oldest dance in relationships. In the hours ahead, we're going to walk through exactly why this happens, how to recognize when it's starting, and what actually works when someone you care about begins to disappear. The pull away is not the end. It's a signal you've been missing. Emotional flooding shutdown. Your partner says something that lands wrong, not mean, just wrong, and suddenly you can feel it. Your chest tightens, your thoughts scatter, your body seems to decide the conversation is over before your mind even catches up. You go quiet, or you leave the room, or you say something you don't mean just to make the feeling stop. What's happening in that moment isn't weakness or avoidance. It's a neurological event called emotional flooding, when your nervous system perceives threat. And yes, relationship conflict absolutely reads as threat to your survival brain. Everything shifts. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that reasons and listens and holds on to why you love this person, goes dark. Your amygdala takes the wheel. You're not being cold or distant on purpose. You're in a state where calm conversation becomes physically impossible. Your body has literally shut down your ability to think straight. It's not a choice, it's a cascade. Here's where the trap deepens. When you shut down, your partner usually panics. They sense rejection and push harder, flooding their own nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. Now you have two people in full crisis mode, unable to access the empathy or curiosity that would actually help. The pull away starts in that gap between what you want to say and what your body will physically permit. The shift comes when you recognize flooding not as proof you should leave, but as a signal to pause. If your chest tightens or your thoughts fog, that's your moment to name it plainly. I'm flooding right now. I need 15 minutes and I'll come back to this. That sentence, honest and time-bounded, tells your partner you haven't abandoned the conversation. You're protecting your ability to show up for it. Your nervous system has to regulate before real dialogue can happen again. Without that pause, you're both just reacting to the alarm bells going off inside, and nothing gets heard. Attachment system deactivation. You reach out for connection and get nothing back. Not anger, not rejection, just flatness. So you stop reaching, not because you stopped loving them, but because your nervous system learned that asking for closeness costs more than it pays. When turning towards someone repeatedly results in shame, dismissal, or indifference, your attachment system gets the message. This bid for connection will hurt. Shut it down. It is the same neural logic that makes your hand pull away from a hot stove, except instead of a stove, it is another human being. Your body does not distinguish between physical pain and relational pain. Both are threats that need managing. So your system dampens the urge to reach, softens the need to be seen, and gradually rewires your expectations. This is not punishment from yourself, it is protection. What makes deactivation so insidious is that it feels like freedom at first. You become self-reliant, distant, easygoing on the surface. You might even feel relieved. No more vulnerability, no more rejection. But underneath, you are running on a lower setting, like a phone in battery saver mode. Present, but not really open. And if that person suddenly softens and reaches back toward you, something strange happens. It can feel threatening, not comforting. Your system is no longer tuned to recognize safety and closeness. You have trained it to expect pain. The real shift begins when you recognize that deactivation was not weakness or stubbornness. It was your nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do to keep you safe. That clarity matters because it lets you see the pattern without shame. And without shame, you can actually start rewiring it, first in small moments, then in relationships that feel different enough to take the risk again. Avoidant deactivating strategies. You're sitting across from someone you care about. They lean in to talk about something tender, how lonely they felt, what they need from you, and something in you shifts. Suddenly, you notice their tone is slightly annoying. Their neediness feels suffocating. The conversation itself seems pointless, or worse, like a trap. You find yourself making a joke, pulling out your phone, or mentally checking out while they're still talking. That sudden flip from warmth to cold distance in seconds, that is a deactivating strategy. It's not a choice you're conscious of making. It's your nervous system hitting the eject button the moment intimacy gets real. What's happening underneath is that closeness triggered an old alarm. Maybe you learned early that needing someone led to disappointment, or that dependence meant losing yourself, or that vulnerability could be weaponized against you. So your brain developed a shortcut. When the other person gets close enough to matter, activate the exit, create distance, find fault, withdraw affection. rejection, make yourself unavailable. It works brilliantly in the short term. The discomfort vanishes, the pressure lifts, and you feel in control again. But here is what makes this pattern sticky. The other person experiences it as rejection, so they either pursue harder, which triggers more deactivation, or they give up entirely, and you, alone again, feel briefly relieved, then gradually empty. The trap is that the very strategy meant to protect you from abandonment often becomes what ensures it. The move isn't to white-knuckle through closeness or shame yourself for pulling away. It's to notice the exact moment the alarm fires, the microsecond when the conversation feels like a threat, and pause there long enough to ask, am I reacting to what's actually happening or to what my past taught me to expect? Anxious protest behavior. You send a text. 3 hours pass, no answer. Your chest tightens, so you send another, then another. Maybe you call, maybe you show up, maybe you say something sharp to prove you matter, to prove they should care enough to respond. Because silence, in that moment, feels like abandonment disguised as a text thread. That escalation, that desperate push to get a reaction, any reaction, is protest behavior. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind. When someone you depend on goes unreachable, your nervous system reads threat, your attachment system screams for contact, and because you cannot tolerate the uncertainty, you do something, anything, to force them to engage. The cruel part is this: protest behavior often backfires. The person pulling away feels pressured. You feel rejected. Both of you dig in deeper. What started as a reach for connection becomes proof to them that closeness with you is suffocating. To you, their withdrawal becomes proof they never cared. Neither of you is wrong. You are both trapped in a cycle where your protection strategy is exactly what triggers theirs. The person with anxious attachment does not protest because they are needy or dramatic. They protest because their wiring learned early that love requires pursuit, that you have to earn the other person's attention, that distance equals loss. The body remembers this lesson long after the mind forgets who taught it. So before your next protest, the next text, the next show of anger or hurt, the next demand for reassurance, pause and feel what is actually happening underneath. Are you reaching for them, or are you running from your own fear of being forgotten? Are you trying to reconnect or trying to prove they cannot leave? That distinction, small as it seems, rewires everything. The fearful avoidant push-pull. You meet someone and something in you softens. You text them, you show up, you're all in. Then something shifts. Maybe they take 3 hours to reply. Maybe you catch yourself wanting more than they seem willing to give. And suddenly, you're building walls. You pull back hard, go cold, convince yourself you don't need them anyway. But the moment they back off or seem distant, panic floods in and you're reaching out again. Softer this time, almost apologetic. That oscillation between clinging and fleeing is the fearful, avoidant pattern, and it leaves both partners dizzy because each one feels like they're simply responding to the other's distance, when really, they're both caught in the same loop. What makes this pattern so sticky is that it usually has roots in early attachment. A parent who was inconsistently available, perhaps loving one moment and withdrawn the next. Your nervous system learned that closeness wasn't safe and solitude wasn't either, so it became an expert at swinging between them. You crave intimacy, but don't believe it will last. So you create the very abandonment you fear, pushing to prove they'll leave. They do, or seem to, and you pull them back in out of panic or regret. Meanwhile, your partner is left wondering which version of you is real, or whether anything they do will ever be enough. The way out isn't to suppress the urge to pull away or cling. That just creates more tension. Instead, start noticing the moment you're about to swing. That tightness in your chest when they're quiet, that urge to shut down or message late at night asking where this is going. That's your signal. Pause there. Breathe. Ask yourself what you actually need in that moment, not what you're afraid they'll take away. Real partnership happens when you can stay present instead of oscillating, and that starts with catching yourself mid-swing. Nervous system co-regulation. You know that feeling when someone you trust walks into a room and your shoulders drop? You weren't thinking about it. Your body just shifted. That is nervous system co-regulation happening in real time. And it is one of the deepest reasons why people stay close, or why they pull away the moment things get fragile. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for safety, and the people around you are broadcasting signals whether they know it or not. When your partner is calm, grounded, present with you, your own system mirrors that safety. Your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, the chatter in your head quiets, but the reverse is equally true. If they are anxious, defensive, checked out, your body picks up on that faster than your conscious mind ever could. You tense, you hypervigilant, you start fighting or freezing without knowing why. Here here is what makes this brutal in relationships. When someone is dysregulated, flooded, anxious, reactive, they cannot actually co-regulate you back. They can't offer the steadiness you need because they are drowning in their own system. And when you pull back from someone repeatedly because being around them leaves you more wound up than calm, you are not being cold or rejecting them. You are protecting your own nervous system's survival. The person who can stay somewhat regulated even when things are hard, who does not need you to absorb their panic before they can hear you, that person becomes magnetic. Not because they are perfect, but because proximity to them feels like safety. If you find yourself withdrawing from someone, it might be worth asking, is this about them as a person or about what my body learns when I am near them? That question can change everything. The vagal brake response. Your nervous system has a hidden escape hatch, and when someone you love gets too close or things feel too intense, that hatch swings open without you deciding it. This is the vagal brake, a biological circuit that literally tells your heart to slow down, your voice to flatten, your body to go still. It is not coldness. It is not choice. It is your nervous system slamming the brakes because something, maybe their anger, maybe their neediness, maybe just the weight of being truly seen, triggered a survival instinct that says, withdraw. The vagus nerve runs from your brain down through your chest and gut, and it has the power to downshift your whole system into a state of dissociation or shutdown. You have probably felt it. The conversation gets heated, and suddenly, you are not there anymore. Not angry, not defending, just gone. Your partner keeps talking to an empty room. Or maybe it happens slower, weeks of feeling watched or controlled, and one morning you wake up realizing you do not feel anything for them anymore. That flatness is the break. What makes this so cruel in relationships is that the person pulling away often does not know it is happening, and the person being left behind does not understand. It is biology, not rejection. They think, you do not love me anymore, but your nervous system is just protecting you the only way it knows how. By unplugging. The trap is that nobody teaches you to recognize the sensation before it locks in. If you can catch that first tightening in your chest, that first urge to go quiet, you have a shot at staying present instead of disappearing into the person you love. That pause is everything. Fight, flight, freeze in intimacy. Your partner says something that lands wrong, and suddenly your chest tightens. You might snap back, pack a bag, shut down completely, or disappear into your phone. None of those feels like choice in the moment. They feel like the only way to survive. That is your nervous system doing what it has done since you were small, protecting you by any means it can find. The issue is that fight, flight, and freeze were built for tigers, not for Tuesday night arguments. When your body perceives threat in intimacy, which could be a raised voice, a long pause, criticism, or even unexpected tenderness, it hijacks your prefrontal cortex and goes into survival mode. Fight looks like aggression or rage. Flight looks like leaving, picking a fight about something unrelated, or suddenly needing space forever. Freeze looks like going silent, going numb, or feeling like your body is not yours anymore. The person across from you is usually not the threat. They are just the person standing there when your old alarm system gets triggered. But here's what makes this tricky. Your partner does not see your nervous system activation. They see your behavior. They see you yelling, leaving, or shutting down, and their own system responds. Now both of you are running, and the actual closeness you both want is buried under two sets of survival instincts. The path forward is not to blame yourself for reacting. It is to recognize the pattern and give your nervous system what it actually needs. Slow breath, a moment to land back in your body, and the quiet knowledge that this person is safe. When you can pause there, even for 10 seconds, the whole dynamic shifts. Your partner becomes a partner again, not a threat. And that changes everything. Learned emotional suppression. Think about the last time someone you loved asked how you really felt, and you said fine when you weren't. Trace that backwards. When did fine become your default? Most of us didn't wake up one day and decide to swallow our feelings. It happened slowly, in small moments. A parent who went quiet when you cried. A sibling who used your tears as ammunition. A classroom where sadness looked weak. A workplace where frustration got you fired. Over years, your nervous system learned a simple equation. My emotions are not safe. Your body started doing what it was trained to do. It built a wall, not out of choice, but out of survival. The problem is that wall doesn't just block the bad feelings. It catches everything. Love, need, fear, joy. All of it gets stuck behind glass. Then you meet someone and they lean in close and ask for more of you and you freeze. Not because you don't want to give it, but because your body is saying no before your mind even knows what's happening. That suppression doesn't feel like suppression to you. It feels like being sensible, being strong, being safe. But your partner is on the other side of the glass, watching you disappear, and they don't understand why. You stop noticing you're doing it. You just notice they're pulling away and feel confused, even betrayed. But they're not running from you. They're running from the distance created by trying to reach through a wall you didn't know you'd built. The first step isn't fixing the wall. It's just looking at it, noticing when you go quiet, when you choose fine instead of truth, when your body locks up instead of leaning in. That small awareness is where the shift begins. The overwhelm withdrawal loop. You know that moment when your partner asks you something simple, how your day was, what you want for dinner, and suddenly you feel a wall go up inside you. Not anger, not distance exactly, just nothing, like you've run out of room in your own head. That's overwhelm withdrawal, and it happens so quietly that most people mistake it for losing interest in the relationship when actually they're drowning and don't know how to say it. When you're already at capacity, work, money stress, family stuff, your own anxiety, the arrival of another person's needs can feel less like connection and more like one more hand reaching into a pool that's already full. So you pull back. Not to hurt anyone, not deliberately. You pull back because giving anything more feels impossible, and the shame of not being able to show up makes it even worse. The trap is that your partner often reads this withdrawal as rejection and pushes harder or pulls away themselves, which makes you feel even more alone inside the overwhelm. So you retreat further. What makes it vicious is that overwhelm is often invisible from the outside. You don't look like you're struggling. You look cold, unavailable, checked out. Your nervous system is screaming that it cannot process one more input. The way out starts small, naming it before the loop tightens. Not when you're already silent and resentful, but when you first feel the walls starting to build. Saying, "I'm not running from you, I'm running on empty," changes everything. It shifts you from being the person who's pulling away to being the person who's asking for help. That one sentence can stop the story your partner tells themselves and remind them, and you, that this isn't the end of closeness. Stonewalling as self-protection. Your partner is asking you something real, something that matters. You feel heat rising, shame creeping up your neck, maybe anger you don't even know how to name, and then something just shuts off. You go quiet, not thoughtful quiet, empty quiet. You stare past them, or at your phone, or at nothing. They keep talking, and you just aren't there anymore. That's stonewalling. And here's what most people get wrong about it. It's not cruelty. Though it lands like cruelty, it's a nervous system screaming for a break it doesn't know how to ask for. When you were younger, maybe words were weapons. Maybe showing emotion meant getting hurt. Maybe the safest thing you learned was to disappear into silence rather than risk being seen and rejected. So now, when vulnerability knocks, your body doesn't negotiate. It just locks the door. The shutdown feels like protection in that moment. Your pulse is racing. Your amygdala is lit up like a fire alarm, and talking feels like walking into traffic. Going stone silent is your brain's way of saying, "I cannot survive this right now." But here's the cruel part. The person across from you doesn't experience your self-protection. They experience abandonment. Your silence feels like rejection to them, which often makes them push harder, which makes your nervous system push back harder. And suddenly, you're in a cycle where both of you are trying to protect yourselves and both of you feel betrayed. The first crack in that pattern starts when you can name what's actually happening inside you, not during the argument, but after, in the quiet. Not, "I was protecting myself, but I was overwhelmed." Not, "They pushed me away, but I disappeared." That tiny shift in awareness changes everything about how you come back to the conversation next time. The demand-withdraw pattern. Watch what happens when someone you love asks you to talk about something that matters. One person leans forward, the other leans back. The first person pushes harder, their voice gets tighter, maybe faster. The second person gets quieter, maybe leaves the room or changes the subject. And then, weirdly, the roles can flip. Whoever was pushing now feels abandoned and starts demanding closeness. Whoever was withdrawing now feels cornered and pulls away harder. This cycle has a name, but more importantly, it has a shape, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in almost every relationship that gets stuck. The demand-withdraw pattern is not really about the topic being fought over. It is about two people reacting to very different fears happening at the same time. One person fears abandonment, so they pursue. The other fears being swallowed or controlled, so they protect themselves by leaving. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. They are both trying to survive, but the faster one reaches, the harder the other pulls away. And the more someone withdraws, the more desperate the reaching becomes. It feels like proof that your partner does not care, when actually they are terrified of losing you. Or it feels like your partner is suffocating you, when really they are drowning and reaching for air. The way out is not to try harder at what you have been doing. It is to stop the cycle itself. Name it when you feel it starting. Tell your partner, I notice I am pushing and you are closing off. I do not want to do this dance tonight. Then pause. That tiny interruption, that awareness shared out loud, is sometimes enough to break the pattern and let two people find each other again. Pursuer and distancer dynamic. You know that feeling when one person in the relationship is always reaching, always asking where things stand, always needing reassurance, and the other person keeps pulling back, getting quieter, needing space. That's not random incompatibility, that's a pattern, and it feeds itself like a closed loop. The more the pursuer leans in, the more the distancer retreats. The more the distancer pulls away, the more frantic the pursuer becomes. Neither person is wrong. They're both just reacting to what the other person is doing, and the cycle gets tighter every time. Here's what happens underneath. The pursuer usually has an old fear of abandonment. They learned early that love requires constant vigilance, that if they don't show up and ask and push, they'll be left alone. The distancer often learned the opposite, that closeness is suffocating, that they need escape hatches and distance to feel like themselves. So when the pursuer moves closer out of fear, the distancer feels trapped and pulls harder. When the distancer retreats to breathe, the pursuer feels rejected and pursues harder. Each person's self-protection strategy is the other person's nightmare. The way out isn't for the pursuer to stop caring or for the distancer to suddenly become clingy. It's for both of them to get curious about what they're actually afraid of, not what the other person is doing wrong. The pursuer has to learn that reassurance doesn't come from outside verification. It comes from building their own ground. The distancer has to recognize that intimacy isn't a trap. It's a choice they can actually control. When either person pauses long enough to see the pattern instead of just react to it, the tightness starts to loosen. That awareness, even small, is often enough to shift the whole dynamic.